Hello and welcome to this special broadcast on day 2 of the informal summit between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping at Mamallapuram in a very informal and natural setting. Along the Coromandel coast next to the Bay of Bengal, they are sitting at the Fisherman's Cove and Spa there, holding in a very informal setting bilateral conversations. This is a one-on-one meeting that is currently ongoing. Yesterday the two leaders had met for nearly 5 hours, 4.5 hours. They were together holding one-on-one conversations, walking along monuments that are of monumental importance insofar as India-China cultural and trade ties of the ancient era are concerned. And we expect in a short while from now opening statements ahead of delegation level talks, and then delegation level talks to take place, and later we'll see that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be hosting Chinese President Xi Jinping to a lunch. Yesterday, you would remember that Prime Minister Narendra Modi hosted the visiting dignitary to a dinner with the theme Taste of India. So, soft diplomacy and cultural diplomacy is what we are seeing on day 1 and day 2 of this informal summit. Besides that, we are seeing sartorial diplomacy as well. Yesterday, you would remember how Prime Minister Narendra Modi was wearing a white shirt and a veshti and an angavastram, which was casually put on his left shoulder, taking forward the soft power that is there in Indian diplomacy. And besides that, there are hard outcomes as well, because only very recently we've come to know that the Indian embassy in Beijing has now decided to further liberalize visa norms for Chinese tourists. They will be allowed multiple entry over 5 years. There are different kind of categories that are there, and India does following up on its words with concrete action. The first action we are seeing it being taken by the Indian embassy in China, even as that informal summit is underway at Mamallapuram in Tamil Nadu. Mamallapuram has had ancient cultural civilizational links with China, particularly Fujian province, of which once Chinese President Xi Jinping was the governor, and Mamallapuram was a strategic choice, that's why, of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to host Chinese President Xi Jinping. We'll discuss the relevance of the ongoing informal summit with former ambassador who's joined us in the studio, Mohan Kumar. I welcome you, Ambassador Kumar, to this special broadcast. Your thoughts on the way this informal summit is progressing as we speak.
So thank you very much for having me. As always, it's a pleasure to be on Doordarshan. I think, frankly, that there are two subliminal messages that India is also trying to send through this summit. One, if you are really going towards a multipolar world, you cannot have a multipolar world without a multipolar Asia. And a multipolar Asia is not possible without China and India. It cannot be just China leading Asia with other countries playing second fiddle. So I would make that point. The second point that really I would make is that we are also trying to indicate to the Chinese side that India too is a very old ancient civilization. We have links with China going back several years, and the choice of Mamallapuram, I think, was absolutely a stroke of genius, if you ask me. I belong to Chennai myself, so obviously I'm prejudiced when I say this, but I think it's an excellent statement to make to the Chinese, who never miss an opportunity to say that theirs is an ancient civilization. So we're trying to make a point that, listen, we are no less ancient, and we had these trade links with China in the olden times. We had Bodhidharma going from India to China, Japan to spread Buddhism. So there are a lot of subliminal messages. You very rightly spoke about the sartorial angle to the visit as well, and that will please Tamils in Tamil Nadu no end. But that's another way of also telling the Chinese that, listen, we are a multi-lingual country, a multi-ethnic country, a pluralist country, and that different parts of the country have different things to offer. So all in all, I see a lot of subliminal messages on offer from the Indian side. And since the Chinese are very good at reading the tea leaves, as it were, they don't miss subliminal messages. And so I think really that is the one level at which I would see this visit, in addition to everything else that you have been saying.
And look at these visuals Ambassador Mohan Kumar, we are seeing Prime Minister Narendra Modi engrossed in a conversation with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the coast of the Bay of Bengal. The ocean is right there. Very much in harmony with nature, would you say? The theme that we saw in the monuments from Arjuna's penance or the descent of the Ganges to Krishna's butterball of living in harmony with nature, the same theme being taken forward here as well?
Yes, again, a subliminal message, and forgive me for over-emphasizing this point, but I think it bears repetition. We're looking at parts of China where there has been massive industrialization, smoke billowing, and they've had issues of environmental degradation, lakes getting polluted and so on. And here we are telling them that even in ancient times, Indians knew how to live in harmony with nature. So once again, I would say Mamallapuram, the choice, just the explanation given by the Prime Minister to the President himself on various things and various sculptures. I would say again another message really to the Chinese, saying that we have kept these things in pristine beauty, and that India has known how to handle this issue as well. So again, another message, I would say.
Look at the relaxed setting there. Look at the body language of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping. Very informal. The camaraderie is there for everyone to see. The bonhomie is there for everyone to see. And this is the first of its kind insofar as this format of informal summit is concerned for China. India is the only country with which China has an informal summit format, so to say, whereas India has this with China as well as Russia. So would you say that this is just the perfect setting to talk on some more tricky and difficult issues in the relationship and take forward the Wuhan spirit?
I'm glad you mentioned the tricky issues, because this setting completely belies, frankly, the issues that the two countries face. I was going to say, and I had written in Hindustan Times about a month ago, saying that this summit for me was absolutely essential, because the relationship was actually not going to be derailed, but a lot of issues were piling up. Not just the issue with Pakistan that we had, not just the issue on Kashmir, not just the issue of trying to put Mazhar Azoud and so on in the UN, the role played by the Chinese at the so-called informal meeting of the UN Security Council. I was, to be honest with you, frankly beginning to get worried. And I think this setting and this absolutely great environment that you talk about belies the issues that actually bedevil the relationship. I had said that actually we need a summit of this kind just to prevent the relationship spiraling out of control. I would still maintain that this summit is extremely useful, because it brings the relationship back on an even keel and keeps the problems on lid, because you need intervention at this level to tackle some of the issues. They have a huge bureaucracy, we have a bureaucracy, and sometimes you just have to accept that the relationship has to be based on a better understanding between the leaders, and that is the way really forward. So I'm absolutely clear in my mind that while it seems like bonhomie, it seems like everything is hunky-dory, I would argue counterintuitively that behind the smiling faces of the leaders, the setting and so on, lies a pile of files which are actually very, very thorny issues between the two countries, and I hope we'll have a chance to discuss that.
Now, be that as it may, but would you say that this summit is taking place because there is a distinct interest on the part of both Indian and Chinese leadership to take the relationship forward? They are both regional heavyweights, they are both world powers, they are forces to reckon with. China is a permanent member in the Security Council, India is an aspiring permanent member in the Security Council, yet they believe that there are convergences that can be built upon, that there is a spirit of cooperation that can be furthered. And would that reflect in people-to-people ties and cultural exchanges going forward? For instance, we've seen this decision that the Indian Embassy in China has taken to further liberalize visa norms for Chinese nationals. So India not just talking, but also delivering, walking the talk, so to say. So, what do you think about the fact that the two leaders agreed to hold informal summits, and how that is playing out insofar as our people-to-people and cultural ties are concerned?
I think you're spot on. The two countries realize that they need each other. If we are looking at a multipolar world, then, as I said, it's very hard for China to ignore India. India, of course, cannot ignore China. I start with that assumption just because of the power differential between the two countries. China has 5 times everything, whichever index or whichever criterion you take by way of power, hard power. You will find that the Chinese outstrip us by 5 to 1. But I think what China realizes probably is that their own ties with the United States have run into rough weather. Their own relationship with Europe is not all that smooth. You do know the center of gravity has shifted to Asia. India has also made some moves, whether it is Indo-Pacific or whether it is having a foreign minister level meeting of the Quad. So I think China realizes that there needs to be better understanding between the two countries. As for your question, your specific question on what impact this will have on cultural and people-to-people ties, I see that as dominating this whole summit, cultural ties, because of what we talked about, Mamallapuram, the relationship between some of the ancient dynasties of Tamil Nadu and China and so on. I think the people-to-people relationship so far has been a little one-sided. When I travel to Shanghai, and I do so now regularly, I find the plane is full of Indians who are going for business, frankly. That's all I found. I did not find a lot of young people, a lot of tourists telling me that, listen, we're going to China for the first time, we want to explore what China has to offer. What this decision by the Indian embassy in Beijing will do is actually try and promote this kind of youth exchanges, I hope, not just business. I think we need a lot more interaction between the youth of the two countries. I sincerely believe that a lot of the Chinese youth don't know India at all. And India, obviously, there is a language issue, so we have also not really gone for education and so on. So I hope this summit and the outcome and the decisions that you referred to earlier will lead to youth exchanges between the two countries.
And I was reading that out of the millions of tourists that go out from China to India, to the world, in fact, a fraction comes to India, and that applies in the Indian context as well as it applies in the Chinese context. Can all that change going forward? Because you would remember what the Foreign Secretary had said while addressing a press conference late last night, that it was believed that one needs to have more exchanges between India and China to foster a greater cultural and people-to-people understanding. He was referring to the civilizational and trade links of yore, like you spoke about during the Pallav and the Chola dynasty in this part of Tamil Nadu, as well as particularly in East China, where Fujian province is located, of which Xi Jinping was in fact a governor some time back. So would you say that that landscape can change, and there is really a whole lot that we're looking at in terms of possibilities to boost tourism, youth exchanges, cultural exchanges? There's a Vivekananda cultural center there as well in China, I understand. So would you say that serious effort being made in this direction?
Oh, absolutely. I think the potential for exchanges in this area is almost limitless, I would say. But you have to bear in mind that governments can facilitate these kind of exchanges by taking decisions of the kind that have been taken. Ultimately, it will depend on the market in terms of what tourists hope to find in India. So we will have to pay some attention to the tourist infrastructure in India, the flight connections between China and India, the facilities available in various parts of the country. So a lot of these things will have to be done. But I think subject to that caveat, I certainly think this will give a fillip to the people-to-people exchanges, especially the youth level exchanges between the two countries.
You told us that during your visits to China, you came across Indians who'd gone there for business purposes. But would you say that there is distinct interest for Bollywood as well? There are monthly movies that the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center organizes in China, and you would remember that when Prime Minister Narendra Modi had gone to China, I think it was during the Wuhan summit itself, that the Chinese played the song Ye Vada Raha, which is from a very popular Indian movie. So would you say that Bollywood forms a strong bond and evinces a lot of interest among the Chinese.
Yes, absolutely. And the funny thing I'll tell you, viewers, is that if you put Amitabh Bachchan, Shah Rukh Khan and Amir Khan in a row, you will be surprised at the results. I think the Chinese will more readily recognize Amir Khan, not the other two, just because of what they saw by way of Dangal. That one movie, I think, has changed completely everything in China. His movies have been a huge hit. So the Chinese are interested in Bollywood, but Bollywood in a particular way. They are not so interested, I think, in just boy running after the girl kind of movies, but movies with a strong content. So content, Hindi cinema, Bollywood, is of huge importance. I forget the name of the movie in which there is a pop singer from the Muslim religion who becomes a great pop singer, and there is another wonderful movie again with a lot of content. So the Chinese are interested hugely in Bollywood, and I know for a fact that Amir Khan movies actually make more money in China because there is a lot of people watching those. So Bollywood is
Prime
an
Minister
important
Narendra
aspect.
Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping once again taking the golf cart, it seems, and you would remember that they had taken the golf cart while moving into the main structure of the Fisherman's Cove for the one-on-one interaction. That one-on-one interaction is continuing. They've moved from one point to another at this venue, the Fisherman's Cove, very much in harmony with nature, and they're all smiles. Look at the comfort that they share with each other. The bonding is there for everyone to see, the camaraderie, the bonhomie, and there are interpreters also that are with them, and besides that security personnel. But Ambassador Kumar, not much work for the interpreters there, it seems, because you are seeing the two leaders locked in a heart-to-heart conversation with interpreters playing a very, very limited role there.
Yes, I mean, look, I think when the two leaders meet, in fact, we are trying to do a case study. I also teach diplomacy, as you know, and we are trying to do whether the case study of leaders meeting and trying to do things without the diplomats and the officials is maybe a new way of doing things. President Donald Trump, of course, has got his own style. But here I think you're looking at two leaders who have literally left. If there is one overriding image for me as a former ambassador, it is that since yesterday, the leaders, as you rightly hint, have not been accompanied by officials. They're only accompanied by interpreters. And by the way, I'm proud to tell you that we have now started having interpreters from the Indian Foreign Service. So the lady that you see and the former interpreter that you see are all actually members of the Foreign Service. We now have a small, we should be having a much bigger, but I think we are well on our way to having a number of people who are absolutely fluent in Chinese. So it's very good that the two leaders are able to spend quality time to go into a freewheeling discussion with absolutely no structured agenda. So if you believe that the two leaders can speak heart to heart, you can pick any issue that you want, issues which the others, even in a delegation level setup, the leaders sometimes don't have the liberty, whether you're a democracy like India or you have a political system like China, the leaders are obliged to give the party line, if you know what I mean, in front of 10, 15 people. Sometimes when you have a heart-to-heart chat between two leaders, you can speak about issues much more freely and look at possible solutions to very thorny issues, as I said, that separate our two countries.
Right, and Chinese President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi now walking on the red carpet. They could well be moving to the venue of the delegation level talks now. We've seen how the two leaders have spent quality time. In fact, the one-on-one interaction had begun sometime around 10:15 this morning. They've been together for now well over 1 hour, for an hour and 15 minutes, and we now expect opening statements also to take place ahead of the delegation level talks. But look at the pristine green beauty, the lush green surroundings of the venue, very much in the lap of nature on the Bay of Bengal, the Coromandel coast, known for its coconuts, its lush green, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping enjoying the pristine beauty of nature there, and they're now heading, it seems, for the delegation level talks. And there were two golf cart rides earlier when the two leaders had arrived. They'd taken the golf cart ride, and after that, moving from one venue to another, they took the golf cart ride. The red carpet has been rolled out for Chinese President Xi Jinping by India, and we've seen a lot of discussion on key bilateral, global and regional issues happen yesterday. We expect more focus, like the Foreign Secretary said, on regional and global issues today. The issues of trade and terrorism and radicalization, and countering these two challenges together so that they don't pose challenges to multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic, multicultural societies of India and China was agreed upon. It remains to be seen what will happen next in terms of, say, border negotiations. And there you are seeing the delegation level talks having begun. And shortly we expect the opening statements as well. And you're seeing Prime Minister Narendra Modi flanked by Foreign Minister or External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. In fact, the Chinese President has with him a huge delegation of around 90 members. There is Wang Yi, as well as senior members of the Communist Party of China. We'll play that audio out as and when we get off the opening statements. And after that, the delegation level talks would begin. There is no formal statement or joint communique or even a joint statement that we expect from this because that's an informal summit, and on the lines of the Wuhan summit, there will be no joint communique, but we expect later in the day a briefing by Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale, by our External Affairs Ministry, on the outcomes of the two-day Mamallapuram summit on the lines of what we saw in Wuhan as well. So would you say, Ambassador Kumar, that this is an opportunity to build on the achievements of the Wuhan informal summit, because there was a lot in terms of understanding and strategic guidance from the leaders on border issues, etc. So, hold your thoughts.
Increased stability और fresh momentum आया है. दोनों पक्षों के बीच strategic communication बढ़ा है. हमने तय किया था कि हम मतभेद को prudently manage करेंगे और dispute नहीं बनने
So there you heard Prime Minister Narendra Modi's opening statement, an excerpt of it during the delegation level talks, and we heard the Prime Minister say that we've now seen increased stability in our relationship, we've seen greater momentum in ties, we've seen higher strategic communication between India and China, and we've seen how the two countries, India and China, have prudently managed their differences. So Mr. Kumar, would you say that that Astana understanding that was there, that differences should not be converted into disputes, there should be wisdom that should be displayed by the leadership of the two sides to prudently manage differences, a point being made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Again, now it was made in Wuhan as well. And Prime Minister perhaps talking about the road that has been traversed since the Wuhan summit. So all in all, it seems that there is an appreciation on both sides that there is a greater stability in the India-China relationship, would you say?
If you ask me very frankly, Wuhan was held against the backdrop of the Doklam crisis. And Wuhan, as you rightly say, led to an understanding by both sides that differences will not be allowed to become disputes. However, since Wuhan, there has been a feeling over the last 6 months, frankly, that the Wuhan spirit is fraying between the two countries. I see the present summit as restoring status quo ante. That is going back and restoring the spirit of Wuhan. That is, we will not allow differences to become disputes. So that's the way I honestly see it as an outsider, obviously, because I do believe last 6 months there have been issues which have caused some strain to the relationship. I see this summit, and for me that will be the litmus test of Mamallapuram summit. If this summit takes us back to the Wuhan spirit, which I think it will, then I think it will be mission accomplished, frankly, because the relationship, frankly, has become so complex that it's not possible to resolve all issues in just a 1.5 day summit, even at this level. I mean, this is the highest possible level, and I recognize that. Even so, the relationship is so complex that it's not possible. But if we can restore the Wuhan spirit, I think it's important to bear in mind that between Wuhan and Mamallapuram, the leaders have met 17 times.
Yeah, this is the
two
18th
leaders.
meeting.
Absolutely.
Since 2014.
So you know, it is therefore somewhat counterintuitive for me to say that all I'm expecting this summit to do is to restore the Wuhan summit. But I know what I'm saying. I'm choosing my words carefully. I really think it's a big deal if we can go back to the Wuhan spirit and start talking frankly about issues. That's the way I see it.
And we are looking at the different format in which the consultations are taking place, sometimes on foot, sometimes on a golf cart, sometimes overlooking the Bay of Bengal. And there you are seeing the two leaders now reaching to the sofa to hold conversations. This is how it's been through the day. We've seen yet another informal setting in which day 2 of the informal summit at Mamallapuram take place. The comfort that the two leaders share is remarkable. It's there for everyone to see. The bonhomie, the bonding is there for everyone to see, and this is remarkable because these are two regional heavyweights. These are two world powers. These are two developing countries. India too is becoming a power to reckon with. China is already a power to reckon with, and there is a distinct interest in the leadership of both countries to take this relationship forward, to build on convergences, to not be set back by differences or any divergences. And there is a recognition that there are differences, but there is a prudent management that is taking place of differences at the same time. So there is nothing like, shoving things under the carpet. It is about recognizing the issues and also recognizing that the leadership of the two sides want to move forward on them, want to find a common ground on them, and that is why the issue of trade was taken up yesterday between the two sides. It was told by Foreign Secretary that the issue of the overall trade volume and the value addition in trade, the overall trade volume in fact is the biggest that India has with any country. It has with China. It is of over $95 billion. The issue of trade deficit is also there of well over $57 billion, the highest that India has with any country. So that issue too was taken up, and perhaps ways in which this trade imbalance can be done away with and more balance in trade can be brought in could also have been discussed. Other issues also which are issues of concern for India as well as China, the issue of terrorism as well as radicalization. India has faced this challenge for years now. China too faces it to an extent, and there was an understanding that there will be a greater cooperation on these fronts as well. So we are looking at soft diplomacy, we're looking at hard diplomacy. We are seeing a different informal format altogether, wherein tricky issues besides of course issues like people-to-people exchanges, cultural exchanges, promoting greater understanding between the peoples of the two regions, liberalization of visa norms take place. So this is really a great mix of issues that is being taken up, and this is a freewheeling conversation format wherein difficult issues are picked up and there is a candid exchange of views on the interests, that is the national interests of both India and China on particular issues, and the governance priorities and national visions of the two countries, how the two countries share their visions insofar as this region is concerned. India has an inclusive Asia-Pacific vision which Prime Minister has outlined in the past. China too is part of that vision. China is part of India's Act East policy as well. So Ambassador Mohan Kumar, tricky issues in an informal setting. There is a lot in terms of possibilities. There could be incremental progress on some fronts. There could be low-hanging fruit in other areas, would you say?
So I like the expression that you used, prudent management. I haven't come across that in all the writings by experts. I think that's a good expression to use.
The Prime Minister used it as well.
Yes, well, good. So I really think that's appropriate. Prudent management of the relationship is appropriate. I also think the setting that you keep referring to, that is Prime Minister Modi's style. You have to give it to him. Since he assumed office in 2014, he has had this deep commitment to two things. One, that leaders should meet in an informal setting, whether it is chai pe charcha, nav pe charcha or things like this. He firmly believes that leaders should transcend the kind of issues that bureaucrats cannot resolve. The second thing he's very particular about is literally flaunting the country's historical heritage to foreign leaders, whether it is Banaras, Gujarat, and now Mamallapuram. I think he has made it a point to kind of take and pick different parts of the country and really flaunt that part of the country to foreign leaders, which is very good as well. On trade, and since I know a little bit about that subject, I think it's one of the issues that is really, really thorny between the two countries. We have $100 billion trade with United States, EU, and ASEAN, and Gulf Cooperation Council. The only country with which we have $100 billion trade, which is completely not in India's favor, is China. Every other relationship that I mentioned, we have a bilateral trade of $100 billion, but it's more or less, equally divided. This relationship is causing us problems because if you take the latest figures, and I was looking at it as I was coming to the studio this morning, we are looking at almost 80 billion in one direction. It's that, including services and merchandise trade. That is frankly a little bit difficult to accept for India because it threatens the trading relationship in a way. So we have to find ways to counter this. Now, one of the ways in which this can be done is through promoting Indian pharmaceutical exports, because that is one thing we are good at. Which the problem also with China, you will remember, is that everything that you can produce, China can produce better and produce cheaper. So you have that problem. The two exceptions, I would say, are pharmaceutical products and rice. Agricultural exports from India, mangoes and stuff like that, which they don't produce. If we can try to get an understanding on regulatory obstacles, that is, when it comes to pharmaceutical drugs, you can't export it like a piece of shirt or a watch or a shoe. You have to get regulatory approval. And that is taking a long time with China. It's taking forever. So we're trying to see if we can enter into an agreement with China and tell them that if a drug is exported to the United States and the US Drug Development Agency has already given permission, then we should be able to export it relatively easily to China. Similarly, agricultural exports, there are things called sanitary, phytosanitary standards which affect agricultural exports. So these are areas in which if China can be understanding of our concerns, then the trade deficit can come down, and that will make for a more sustainable trade relationship, because the present pattern of trade is completely unsustainable.
Taking
So that
the
must be one
trade
of
issue forward, the Chinese ambassador to India had spoken ahead of the informal summit, and he said that trade deficit has been reduced by 15% in the last 5 years. And since the Wuhan summit, we've seen some incremental progress with regard to exports of non-basmati rice by India, even sugar or fish meal, fish oil, etc. And there are some protocols also that have been signed in 2019 with regard to rapeseed oil, etc. So incremental progress being seen there, but you are saying that it is important to do much more, because in 2008 China became India's single largest trade partner, surpassing the United States, and since then, particularly because China has an export-led economy, and it has a booming export-led economy in a sense because of its advantage in manufacturing, that problem is there, but you expect that some forward movement would be made going forward as well on this.
I think as opposed to the other thorny issues that face the two countries, I actually expect progress on the trade front. That is an area where actually China can very easily accommodate some of our concerns. It's not like accommodating us on other issues like the border dispute and so on, which will take time. On trade, I think China can make progress. The other thing I would add for your viewers is we are not just looking mathematically at the deficit. If India
but also
is going,
quality of the deficit
exactly,
is what you mean.
if India is just going to export iron
Okay,
ore
just,
and minerals.
Hold your thoughts, we'll take that forward. Let's listen in to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's opening remarks at the delegation level talks first.
मुझे खुशी है कि सांस्कृतिक धरोहर के कुछ सर्वोत्कृष्ट उदाहरणों के आपको परिचित कराने का गौरव हमें मिला। एक्सेलेंसी, पिछले 2000 सालों के अधिकांश कालखंड भारत और चीन दुनिया की प्रमुख आर्थिक शक्तियां रही है। अब इस शताब्दी में हम फिर से साथ साथ उस स्थिति को प्राप्त कर रहे हैं। एक्सेलेंसी, पिछले वर्ष वुहान में हमारी इनफॉर्मल समिट से हमारे संबंधों में इंक्रीज स्टेबिलिटी और फ्रेश मोमेंटम आया है। दोनों पक्षों के बीच स्ट्रेटेजिक कम्युनिकेशन बढ़ा है। हमने तय किया था कि हम मतभेद को प्रूडेंटली मैनेज करेंगे और डिस्प्यूट नहीं बनने देंगे। एक दूसरे के कंसर्न के बारे में सेंसिटिव रहेंगे और हमारे संबंध विश्व में शांति और स्थिरता के कारक होंगे। एक्सेलेंसी, ये सभी हमारी बड़ी उपलब्धियां हैं। इनसे हमें भविष्य में और अधिक प्रयास करने की प्रेरणा मिलती है। चेन्नई समिट में अब तक हमारे बीच द्विपक्षीय और वैश्विक मुद्दों पर महत्वपूर्ण विचार विनिमय हुआ है। वुहान स्पिरिट ने हमारे संबंधों को एक नया मोमेंटम और ट्रस्ट दिया। आज के हमारे चेन्नई कनेक्ट से दोनों देशों के बीच सहयोग का एक नया दौर शुरू होगा। एक्सेलेंसी, अब मैं आपको प्रारंभिक स्टेटमेंट के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं।
There you were seeing Prime Minister Narendra Modi deliver his opening statement at the delegation level talks that are currently underway. Prime Minister outlining the progress that has been made in bilateral ties since the Wuhan summit of April 2018. Delegation level talks are currently underway. Delegation level talks are underway. There is a delegation of 90 members that is accompanying Chinese President Xi Jinping. On the Indian side also there are several members including the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. And we heard the Prime Minister speak on the progress that has been made in bilateral ties since the Wuhan summit. He also said that the Chennai summit is set to open a new chapter in India-China relationship. He said that it was decided in Wuhan that both sides will be sensitive to each other's core concerns. Besides that, it was also decided that India-China relationship would be a factor of stability for the entire world. These are live visuals that we are getting of the delegation level talks that are currently underway. There were one-on-one talks that had taken place that lasted for well over 1 hour between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. We expect to know the outcomes in an MEA press conference later in the day, but there are expectations with regard to how this Mamallapuram summit is going to further strengthen ties between India and China.
और हमारे संबंध विश्व में शांति और स्थिरता के कारक होंगे। एक्सेलेंसी, ये सभी हमारी बड़ी उपलब्धियां हैं। इनसे हमें भविष्य में और अधिक प्रयास करने की प्रेरणा मिलती है। चेन्नई समिट में अब तक हमारे बीच द्विपक्षीय और वैश्विक मुद्दों पर महत्वपूर्ण विचार विनिमय हुआ है। वुहान स्पिरिट ने हमारे संबंधों को एक नया मोमेंटम और ट्रस्ट दिया। आज के हमारे चेन्नई कनेक्ट से दोनों देशों के बीच सहयोग का एक नया दौर शुरू होगा। एक्सेलेंसी, अब मैं आपको प्रारंभिक स्टेटमेंट के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं।
Your Excellency, Prime Minister, it is my great pleasure to come to this beautiful city of Chennai at your invitation and have this second informal summit with Your Excellency. I want to especially thank you for the fact that since the moment that we arrived we have been immersing or overwhelmed by this kind of gracious hospitality and thoughtful arrangements that the Indian side has made. Me and my colleagues have felt that very strongly. And we are really overwhelmed by your hospitality, and we feel that Mr. Prime Minister, the Indian government, and the state of Tamil Nadu, and the people here cherish friendly sentiment toward Chinese people, the Chinese government, and we really feel your sincere welcome to us during this visit. So this will be a very memorable experience for me, for us, and will have a far-reaching impact for the Chinese people. I saw that the Chinese media has published a lot of articles about China-India relations, about the friendly relations between our two countries. Mr. Prime Minister, last year we held the first informal summit. Actually, this initiative was put forward by you, Mr. Prime Minister, and I agree that it is a good idea. Indeed, the Wuhan summit ushered China-India relations into a new stage of healthy and steady development. For the past 1 year or so, the informal summit continues to produce visible progress. We have deeper strategic communication, more effective practical cooperation, more diverse people-to-people and cultural exchanges, and we have a closer cooperation on multilateral occasions. What has happened has proved that we have made the right decision to have this kind of informal summit, and we can well continue with this form of meeting. China and India are each other's important neighbor, and we are the only two major countries, each with over 1 billion people. To maintain and grow China-India relations is a firm policy of China. Yesterday and earlier today, Mr. Prime Minister, as you said, you and I have engaged in candid discussions as friends in these heart-to-heart discussions on bilateral relations. We've had really in-depth engagement and good discussions. I am happy and I really enjoy our conversations so far. So I look forward to further discussions in an in-depth manner with you in the full delegation discussion and make further plans for bilateral relations. I may follow up on the proposals and issues discussed yesterday. I will make some responses. I'm sure that our discussion today will further bring forward our relations. Thank you.
So the delegation level talks taking place between the Indian side and the Chinese side. You heard earlier Prime Minister Narendra Modi speak on the progress made in bilateral ties, particularly since the Wuhan summit of April last year, and also Chinese President Xi Jinping profusely thanking Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the state of Tamil Nadu, the people of Tamil Nadu, for extending to him a very, very warm reception, saying that he and Prime Minister Narendra Modi have spoken in depth on a whole lot of issues, and also committing that he would be taking forward progress on proposals made by PM Modi yesterday. And he's also spoke about the Chinese media, saying that there are a lot of good articles that of late have been published on the potential that is there in the friendly relationship between India and China. Also saying that India and China have engaged each other this time around. He has engaged with Prime Minister Narendra Modi as friends. That is an extremely significant term that Chinese President Xi Jinping has used for his relationship with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and China's relationship with India. He began by saying that since we arrived, we've got very gracious hospitality, and that we are overwhelmed by your hospitality, by the state of Tamil Nadu and the people of Tamil Nadu. that shows the sentiment of warmth that is there for the people of China. You would remember that Foreign Secretary Tu had said that yesterday also Chinese President Xi Jinping had profusely thanked the Indian Prime Minister for the warm reception that he was accorded at the airport, his stay arrangements, etc. And he said that this is going to be a memorable moment for us and will have a far-reaching impact insofar as the Chinese people are concerned. He then spoke about the Chinese media and various articles on the potential that is there in this relationship that have been published of late, and said that Wuhan summit was your idea, Mr. Prime Minister. And the kind of progress that we have made in our bilateral ties since then is reason that we should be continuing with this format. So President Xi Jinping crediting Prime Minister for having come up with a brilliant initiative of an informal summit between him and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and he said that let's continue with this forum of meeting, because since then, look at the kind of progress that we've made as countries. We've had deeper strategic communication, we've had more practical and diverse communication, we've had greater people-to-people exchanges, and he said that our countries have more than 1 billion people, and we have engaged in candid heart-to-heart conversation on bilateral issues as friends, quote unquote. And I may follow up on the proposals that you've made, and there have been in-depth good discussions. So would you say then, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, that this is really a sign of success of the informal summit in Wuhan as well as Mamallapuram, because you are seeing that both sides have been willing to be part of this format and both sides want this format to continue?
Yes, whichever way you look at it, there is no gainsaying the fact that this summit was necessary, in my view, and the fact that this summit now has been accepted by both leaders as something that they found extremely useful. And you heard from both leaders that strategic communication is something that they are emphasizing over and over again. So I certainly agree with you. What I am very intrigued about is the reference to proposals, and that will take time for it to come out into the open. We will hear about it in the next few days. It's very obvious, therefore, that these wonderful golf cart discussions and talks that you saw, I think there is a little bit more to it than that. They are taking in, of course, the pristine beauty of the place, but they are also talking to each other. And I think the specific proposals, and I don't know who made the proposals to whom, but it's very interesting that the Chinese leader says, I will look at your proposals, and it's very interesting that you made these proposals, and I'd like to react to it. I mean, I just want to tell your viewers that there are two different models of communication you are looking at. One is, of course, the informal summit meeting. Now it's the opening delegation. This is standard diplomatic practice.
This is more structured in nature.
Absolutely.
We'll return to that.
Absolutely.
Ambassador Kumar, correspondent Abhishek is now joining us on the phone line. Abhishek, we heard Chinese President Xi Jinping appreciating no end the idea of the Wuhan summit that was initially extended by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and both the leaders outlined how this format has been a success in improving strategic communication and doing a lot more in terms of servicing this relationship. And Xi Jinping also said that we may look at following up on the proposals that were made in our conversations yesterday. So do we expect some concrete outcomes either to be announced today or maybe in the days to come?
Some concrete announcement is something that we'll have to really wait, because this is an informal summit where the leaders didn't have any pre-decided agenda to talk about. It was more about understanding each other's perspective or respective issues which concern both the countries, and also there have been disputes and differences on various issues. So this was more about getting a perspective of what China thinks about India and what India thinks about China. And this is why this meeting becomes very important, because as Prime Minister Modi himself has said in his opening remarks, that India and China used to be a very strong global leader in the history, but now again these two Asian nations are achieving that stature of a strong economy, a power center where world is looking forward to know what their what their viewpoint is about the global issues, about the regional issues. So that is when it becomes more important for these two nations to behave in a way that augurs well for the kind of stature that world wants them to be. And President Xi and Prime Minister Modi has understood this fact, and that is why the issues of differences, the opinions that they have had on various issues, that is being understood in a manner where both the countries can engage on multiple levels, starting from the highest leadership that President Xi and President Modi have, then that goes to ministerial level, then official level. We've seen that there are regular interaction between the leaders, between the officials of India and China on be it issues of trade, be it issue of boundary disputes, or the issues of terrorism, which was very significant for India, especially when it has been affected by a lot of terrorism, and too when it is being harbored and sent from across the border. So these are the issues that have been of very importance in the relation between India and China. And both the leaders, when they talk, they are going to discuss these issues. As it has been said in the opening remark only, we expect that the delegation level talk, which also has senior leadership from Chinese side and senior leadership from Indian side, they will also be able to come to some point when the relationship will be going forward, will be strengthening and more getting more mature in the days to come.
Right, Abhishek, is there every indication at this Mamallapuram summit that this format of an informal setting and informal heart-to-heart conversations are here to stay?
Yes, Mumbai, exactly. Because you see, though there is not a fixed agenda or fixed point of discussion that would have happened in a normal set of bilateral talks, but still we know that the delegation that accompanies Xi Jinping is not only important, but it is very close in terms of policy making of Chinese state of China. And the same goes with India. When Indian Prime Minister is accompanied by Foreign Minister, National Security Advisor, Foreign Secretary, and yes, who is also looking after China. Then there are other layer of officials, ambassadors of both the countries, and this is where both sides are trying to discuss and know the issues of concern for on both the sides and how to tackle these issues.
Abhishek, did you get a sense from the opening statements of the two leaders that both leaders are keen on together working to make 21st century Asian century?
See, they have, like Prime Minister himself said, कि पुराने समिट में हमने डिसाइड किया था कि हम इन अपने रिलेशंस को प्रूडेंटली मैनेज करेंगे और किसी भी प्रकार का डिस्प्यूट नहीं होने देंगे, एक दूसरे के कंसर्न के बारे में सेंसिटिव रहेंगे. और ये चेन्नई समिट उन्होंने कहा कि जो कल की बात हुई है, द डिस्कशन दैट वाज हेल्ड लास्ट इवनिंग, so that discussion were kind of warming up for the talk that would happen in the morning. And as they say that we cannot deny the fact that there has been disputes, there have been differences, there has been issues of perception of different perception for the same issue from the respective side. So to solve one problem, first one has to acknowledge that there are issues. So both the countries in all understanding, they have now acknowledged that there are issues. But then once you acknowledge these issues, and how to go ahead, how to deal with these issues, and that is where the leadership, their willingness, their political will comes into play. Where Prime Minister Modi has started this unique sort of informal summit and to engage with the Chinese leadership at the highest level and to be frequent, be regular in their interactions. We know that since the Wuhan summit, India Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping have been able to meet over 6 times over different venues on different global platforms. So that also tells the kind of frequent meeting that these two leaders are having. So they must be talking about the issues that they have discussed, the progress that they have made so far, and that how should they go about so many issues that there are. Like we have been talking about issues of trade ties, both the countries want to have a strong trade ties, but then how to, get rid of that imbalance where the trade happens, but it happens at the, pleasure of both the countries. Both the countries are happily agreeing to those terms where the industries of respective countries are not affected. The market access in India and in China for the for the companies of either side are more open, and how this happens at the same time, the interests of respective countries and their manufacturers and their industries are taken well care of. So these are the issues that I'm sure that will be coming up during the discussion, and the leadership will be deciding on how to go ahead about these issues.
Abhishek, there were reports earlier that there could be separate talks on the sidelines of the informal summit between Indian leaders like our foreign minister as well as national security advisor and the Chinese leadership as well. Are you getting any such information that there were talks or would be talks that will be separately held between Chinese and Indian officials other than on the sidelines, in fact, of this informal summit?
Yes, we had this information that since this happens to be a very good opportunity when the leadership is also there, experts are also there, and the ministers of respective departments are also present there. So it could be an opportunity where the understanding at various levels, both the country will try to, enhance that understanding. So that might be happening somewhere during this dialogue period or the next 2 hours that President Xi Jinping is still here. And we get a sense that that meeting is, is getting well, and it might be delayed also. If it happens, that will be, that what should be taken in a very positive manner, because last evening also we saw that dinner that was scheduled to be for somewhere around 25 minutes to 1 hour, that extended to over 90 minutes. So that says that the President Xi and Prime Minister Modi were interested in talking about issues of concern, issues of interest, and also that how can both these countries can collaborate on the issues where they don't have competition. Not necessarily you have to compete in every area. There are areas of expertise that one needs to acknowledge about each other. Like Indian companies have their, Indian pharmaceutical industries it is in a stage where it is advanced stage. The generic medicine that India produces are much in demand in China, and there has been a demand from Chinese people and Chinese industry itself that there should be more market access for Indian pharmaceutical products. So, but then we have also that Chinese electronic manufacturing is in advanced stage, and India is way much dependent on Chinese electronic manufacturing equipment and apparatuses. So we have to acknowledge the certain areas where there are expertise, and we have to also acknowledge that the areas where we are dependent on each other. So, given the fact that there are scope of collaboration, there are scope of dependence where we can help each other to grow at the same time.
Right.
So, what could be the areas where we can collaborate without having any competitive sentiment?
Right, Abhishek. Thank you for those inputs from Mamallapuram. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, is the broad sense that one gets from these opening statements is that there is genuine interest on both sides to take this relationship forward. They want to be forward-looking. There is no shoving of the differences, and that's why Prime Minister spoke about what was decided at the Wuhan summit, that there will be prudent management of differences. We know that it was decided, in fact, way back in Astana, that differences won't be allowed to deteriorate into disputes. So would you say that at a broad policy and leadership level, there is an understanding that we are two powers to reckon with in this region, and we should be looking at complementarities and points of convergence?
Yes, I think that is an inference that you can draw. I think you're right in saying there is a commitment by both sides actually to make sure that the relationship needs to be taken forward, that if there are problems that the two countries face, they need to be sorted out between the two countries. I think those are inferences that you can make, I believe. I actually think that yesterday's one-on-one may have been about red lines and core interests. The core interests of India, whether it is Kashmir, whether it is the border dispute, which has it's not been possible to solve it despite so many years. Those are issues that leaders can speak more frankly when they do one-on-one. Today's meeting could be more about the structural issues. It could be about trade, it could be about regional issues, international issues, but that is only my guess. I really believe the one-on-one that the two leaders had could be about genuinely telling each other that, listen, these are our core interests and they need to be respected by your side. And the Chinese also, for example, they were not too happy about the military exercises that we conducted in Arunachal Pradesh. For example, we had the Quad meeting at the foreign ministers level for the first time. So they might have also said that. But from India's side, I believe some of the red lines and our core interests could have been communicated to President Xi Jinping. But I go back to what you said, and I think that's an inference that you can make, which is the commitment of both sides to adhere to the Wuhan spirit of not allowing differences to become disputes, the commitment of both sides to manage the problems, the prudent management of the relationship, and the commitment of both sides to make progress where possible. And trade is one area, people-to-people exchanges is another, tourism is yet another. Those are areas in which progress can be made. So maybe that is broadly what could be, summarized as the outcome of Mamallapuram summit.
Besides that, we know that the issue of terrorism and radicalization was also discussed. The Prime Minister said that we discussed regional, global and bilateral issues. The Foreign Secretary said yesterday most of the component was on bilateral issues, and that's why perhaps your sense on the kind of issues that may have been discussed yesterday. Today, we are focusing on more regional and global issues. On the issue of terrorism, as far as I know, there is a joint counterterrorism exercise that has been planned for later this year, despite the peculiarities that are there in the region. And under the SCO also, various countries do cooperate. India became a full member of the SCO not too long back. There is a RATS structure there under which such exercises which in the realm of counterterrorism take place. So even on an issue like counterterrorism, it seems that both sides are willing to work together, and that's what the Foreign Secretary said. They decided to work together to combat terrorism as well as radicalization.
I think they will need to work together, frankly, on the issue of terrorism, because both countries are keen that there should be no threat to law and order. China certainly much more than India, because that's how their society is structured, on the basis of law and order. So that would be a broad agreement at that level. I think the issues in this dossier with regard to terrorism will be, for India, it is very difficult to talk about terrorism without bringing in cross-border terrorism from Pakistan, frankly. I mean, your viewers should know that when you go beyond the generalities, India will speak about cross-border terrorism. And there we will have to wait and see how China responds to that. Could it be that India requests China that, listen, they are your close partner, Pakistan, maybe you should tell them that in this day and age, where every country is trying for economic development, every country attaches importance to law and order, cross-border terrorism is something that is yesterday's issue, really. It's not something that you expect in today's day and age. So if this is the point made by India, I'm in no position to second guess what the Chinese will say. And bear in mind that Imran Khan has just finished a meeting in China, just before President Xi Jinping set out to Mamallapuram. So those kind of conversations on terrorism, beyond the generalities, I think they would be very interesting to watch.
But we've seen how persuasion has worked even in this context, with Maulana Masood Azhar being listed by the UN, China finally withdrawing whatever differences it had on this issue, and we saw how that listing finally took place. So it seems that when there is persuasion at a multilateral, plurilateral or global level, China does see reason, and perhaps that's why the Maulana Masood Azhar UN listing took place, even though China had a consistent position to the contrary in the past. So would you say that with time perhaps things would change for the better, even on the counterterrorism front, insofar as China's strategic priorities are concerned?
Oh, I entirely agree. I think you're right. This is why I think meetings like this, summit level meetings like this become important. You need repeated conversations between leaders, and especially a country like China, you need to have repeated conversations so that you can persuade them to change their mind. And I'm sure they will also manage to change our mind on some issues, and that is precisely the give and take that happens between countries at this level. So I quite agree with you. I think India should persist with speaking to China and speaking at this level so that it can get China to see our point of view. One of the things that the two leaders are consciously or unconsciously trying to do is to convince each other of their point of view. That is also another thing that the leaders try to do in a setting like this. So I quite agree with you. I think repeated conversations on an issue, because for India, terrorism becomes an existential issue. I'm not sure it is the same for China, although they have issues as well. But I think for India, it becomes extremely critical. And I think you're right. We need to have these conversations to try and persuade China to see our point of view.
And the Prime Minister spoke about the understanding that was reached at Wuhan between the two leaders on how to respect each other's core concerns, aspirations, etc. And did you notice the fact that India did not comment or pass any red line vis-a-vis the Hong Kong protests, or its position on Tibet has also been quite clear? So India respecting that.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it was there for everybody to see that we have not spoken
Okay,
at
just
all.
hold your thoughts. These are live visuals that we are getting of the third golf cart ride in a matter of hours between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The red carpet has been rolled out by India to the Chinese president, and these are conversations that are taking place in a very, very informal setting amid the lush greens of the Fisherman's Cove, in fact, in Mamallapuram along the Coromandel coast at the Bay of Bengal. So the two leaders are soaking in this pristine and natural beauty around them while taking up key issues of bilateral, regional and global interest. The second informal summit between the two leaders in a matter of 2 years, and an agreement on principle, it seems, that this format is going to continue. And you can notice the body language of the two leaders, the comfort that they share with each other. And we've seen that from yesterday with so much cultural diplomacy, sartorial diplomacy, dinner diplomacy, and now lunch diplomacy also perhaps. So that golf cart ride taking place there at the lawns of the Fisherman's Cove at Mamallapuram. The two leaders, accompanied only by the two interpreters, which, like our guest in the studio told us, are now IFS officers, and of course Chinese Foreign Service officers, only accompanied by security. They're soaking in the beauty around them. There is perhaps a message of fighting climate change and sustainable development also there, because and also perhaps cooperation insofar as ocean ecosystems is concerned. Prime Minister is so concerned about the issue of environmental protection that he picked up garbage from the beach and collected it and gave it to a staff member of the hotel. So Prime Minister, in fact, leading by example in that context, and as a global leader also, his contributions in the fight against climate change have been immense, and also for sustainable development with the International Solar Alliance, an idea of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, now having under it 80 countries no less under its umbrella. The Coalition on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, also an idea mooted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and Prime Minister had at the UNGA also called upon all the UN member states, 193 of them, to be part of this. Prime Minister making a conscious attempt to reach out to the Chinese leadership. He has a very proactive and a different style of diplomacy, which has now takers within India and outside, because this does play a significant role insofar as making some forward movement on tricky issues are concerned, or even on people-to-people exchanges and stronger cultural ties, because it does bring people closer together. Because once the people of India and China look at the comfort level that these two leaders share, they'll be more enthused about Indian culture and Chinese culture and Chinese movies and Indian movies and Chinese theatre and Indian theatre. And there you are seeing that there are a number of artifacts and textiles that have been exhibited, and there will be a tour of sorts, another guided tour. Yesterday there was a guided tour along monuments of monumental importance and cultural and trade ancient links between India and China. This is a different tour of sorts, again has a lot of cultural importance, because you are looking at your screens the bronze statues that have been manicured by artisans in the past. And these are in fact Swami Malai bronze icons, also Nachiyar coil brass lamps you'll get to see, that you're seeing on the right side of your screens are those brass lamps. Going forward, you look at the Thanjavur art plate as well, and the Thanjavur picture painting. Thanjavur paintings are world famous, so are Kanjivaram saris, and you saw the saris also displayed there earlier. A Mamallapuram stone carving is what you'll see in this entire expanse that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be giving a guided tour of to Chinese President Xi Jinping. Kala Kuruchi sandalwood carving, traditional flower garland making, Kanchipuram sari weaving. So that cultural connect that we saw yesterday in terms of those monuments from Arjuna's cave or descent of the Ganges to the Krishna's butterball, now taking a more sartorial shape, a more craftsman-like shape today on day 2 of the informal summit. In fact, every woman in India would want to have a Kanchipuram sari in their wardrobe, because you know such is the fame of these Kanchipuram silk saris. And look at the intricate details of these carvings and the way the artisans in fact are working. This is indeed a piece of art, like those monuments that we saw yesterday, which were carved out of rock solid stones. And now here the weaving exercise takes place, and you are looking at a live demonstration of sorts of that weaving take place on Kanjivaram saris. So the weavers, the artisans, the craftsmen, they're all there present, adding a fresh new dimension to India-China relationship beyond, of course, you know, the brass tacks and the hard diplomacy that we see. This is a soft diplomacy which is giving a new vigor, opening new doors of friendship and cooperation between India and China. It was stated by the Foreign Secretary yesterday about the trade links between this part of Tamil Nadu in the past during the 7th, 8th, 9th century and the Fujian province in East China, of which Xi Jinping was a governor at one point in time, and how there was a broad understanding to have more exchanges to take knowledge about Indian culture and Chinese culture and the links between them. The way Hyun Sang, the Chinese monk and traveler, had traveled to India in the past, and how Bodhidharma, the Indian scholar and monk who had traveled to Japan and China to spread Zen Buddhism. You know, those aspects, there is a greater appreciation of that, and now you're seeing that live demonstration take place. Another guided tour in a matter of 2 days, the second such tour in a matter of 2 days. Prime Minister Narendra Modi showing the artisans' work, the handicrafts, the textiles that are extremely significant in South Indian culture and Tamil Nadu culture to Chinese President Xi Jinping. So first-hand experience is what Chinese President Xi Jinping is getting as part of this guided tour. So to give you more details of what they are seeing, this is a statue that is erected on their right, and they're looking very intently at each other, and the Chinese president looking intently at the crafts that are displayed at this exhibition. The interpreters also stepping in for a while for a greater understanding of what the Prime Minister is telling the Chinese President. And the weavers and the craftsmen are there. They are also, handing over those handicrafts to Prime Minister. Prime Minister explaining to them in intricate detail. This is the miniature statue of Lord Ganesh that we saw, and also of Lord Buddha. If I saw that right, Buddhism has been a strong cultural connect between India and China. There have been Buddhist monks who have traveled from China to India. Buddhist monks have traveled from India to China. We were talking about Bodhidharma, the Pallav prince who had spread Buddhism, Zen Buddhism to China and Japan, and these handicrafts are there displayed. There is a Nachiar coil brass lamp as well, but before that we are looking at stones perhaps that are of significant value again in Tamil Nadu culture. And when excavations had taken place at this place Mamallapuram, some Chinese potteries and Chinese coins had also been discovered. So a lot of artifacts displayed there. There are brass lamps, and the lamp is in fact best known metalware of Tamil Nadu, considered to be the symbol of Agni, the god of fire, and Surya, the sun. The lamp is deemed auspicious. The primary metal is copper and zinc. So Prime Minister showing each and every artifact and handicraft to Chinese President Xi Jinping, and there is use of precious metal also like gold, silver, etc. in the making of many of these artifacts, and it's a treasure trove really of South Indian and Tamil Nadu culture that is there in front of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. So this will foster a greater cultural and people-to-people understanding between the two countries. There's a Thanjavur art plate perhaps that you saw earlier, and that plate features intricately made deities, birds, flowers and geometric patterns. This is the lamp that you are now seeing that I'd earlier spoken about, that is the Nachiar coil brass lamp. This lamp is best known metalware of Tamil Nadu, is considered to be the symbol of Agni and Surya, that is the sun god. The lamp is deemed auspicious. The primary metal is copper and zinc. So that is the lamp that you are seeing. Besides that, there is the Thanjavur art plate that is displayed, the Swamimalai bronze icons that are displayed, the Thanjavur picture painting that is also there, and also the Mamallapuram stone carving. You saw a glimpse of that yesterday. You'll see another glimpse of that today, and the Kalakuruchi sandalwood carving is also there displayed. Kanchipuram saris, of course, and the Nachiar coil brass lamp. Based on the design, pattern is made which is hollow cast by using the box mold method. A traditional lamp is made in 4 parts that can be assembled to form the lamp. The base, stem, lamp and crown on top. The crown can be gods like Ganesh, goddesses like Lakshmi or celestial birds. So that's about the lamp that we saw. Now the two leaders are looking at how a Kanjivaram silk sari has been woven. Kanjivaram silk saris are made in the Kanchipuram section in Tamil Nadu. They are worn as bridal and special occasion saris by most women in south of India. It was recognized as a GI, a geographical indication, by the government of India in 2005-2006. The saris are woven with pure silk and gold, silver and copper threads. The borders and the body of the sari are usually woven separately and attached. The weight, the traditional motifs and the bright hues of the sari reflect the depth, the warmth and richness of the culture. So this is not just a piece of cloth. This has in it the richness, the depth, the warmth of the culture of Tamil Nadu. This is a must-have in every Indian woman's wardrobe, the Kanjivaram silk saris. And there are silk stoles also that are displayed, and you'll see Prime Minister Narendra Modi on alongside those motifs that is there, and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. So the stamp of India-China relations very much there at on the Kanchipuram saris. Our correspondent Amrit Pal is with us on the phone line. Amrit, we saw a guided tour yesterday of monuments, and now we are seeing another guided tour of sorts, and we are seeing how Prime Minister Narendra Modi is showing to President Xi various stoles, some with image of the President, some with images of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Walk us through this.
That's right, Munmun. What is happening right now is that the Prime Minister is taking President Xi to this exhibition. He's showing him, as you were talking about the Kanjivaram saris, he's already taken him through the various brass lamps and the artwork, the Thanjavur art plate, and the demonstrations, the bronze icons. So the Prime Minister right now is showing him the Kanjivaram sari with a reflection of President Xi's face on it. So both leaders holding up the Kanjivaram sari with his, the reflection of his face being woven into the sari there in gold work. So, and the Prime Minister explaining it himself and gifting it to the visiting dignitary, the Thanjavur sari. So, remember this, when silk first came to India, it actually came via China, and where President Xi is right now in Mamallapuram, it's a part of the Kanchipuram district, and Kanchipuram was the place from where Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, went to Fujian, of which President Xi has been the governor, and as a return, the silk had come here. So these silk saris have become very famous, and we see the art plate work with with Prime Minister Modi's picture on it. So these gifts go a long way in establishing the bond between the two countries, or strengthening the bond between the two countries, by basically taking him through these lamps and the artwork and the sari and the plate, the sandalwood carvings, the Prime Minister, and the stone carvings. The Prime Minister basically putting the relationship in perspective in terms of, so it's really cultural diplomacy at its best. After the one-on-one talks and the delegation level talks, now we can see soft diplomacy on display right now.
Right, Amrit, and we are seeing gifts already being given by Prime Minister, it seems, to the Chinese President. You spoke about how the Kanjivaram silk sari has perhaps been gifted to Chinese President Xi Jinping by Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Munu, could you please repeat your question? I'm sorry, there was an audio issue.
No, I was saying that gifts are already being given by Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Chinese President. A Kanjivaram silk sari has already been given, and perhaps there's more on offer?
Yes, what we understand is that the Prime Minister would share a Thanjavur painting with, would give a Thanjavur painting to President Xi as a gift. That's what we were told. I will have to wait for the official confirmation to confirm that. But what we are seeing here at the Fisherman's Cove, basically the Prime Minister taking him around, and he's gifted him Kanjivaram sari. That we can that I can confirm with you. But I was told that Thanjavur picture painting is also to be gifted. Now he's basically taking him through the live demonstration of the art plate demonstration and the brass making, the brass icon painting. So this is the metal combination of bronze icons, which is actually in the making. And now these pictures that you see on your screens right now are basically stone sculptures. It's stone artwork and stone carvings that President Xi is being shown around in an actual workshop. So the president of China being taken along to the live craft workstations by Prime Minister Modi, and as I was saying, this is basically to showcase the culture and the art, the intricate art of this place, the art of Tamil Nadu, different parts of Tamil Nadu on display to the Chinese president. Which is basically reaching out in terms of culture. It's also when the Prime Minister showcases the art, the intricate art, it is a reflection of the diverse culture that exists in a land as diverse as India. This is all what we've inherited from so long, and it has these traditions have been preserved in the modern times. So, in a way, when President Xi in his opening statement said that the Chinese media has been covering these talks very, very widely. So, when the Chinese media tomorrow prints this, or the Chinese television puts out these visuals, it obviously sends a message to the larger Chinese population about how rich and diverse a culture India is, how scenically beautiful it is, and I understand that would give a boost to tourism, or should give a boost to tourism as well.
Amrit, we know that Chinese president has a lot of interest in history and culture. So, do you see that interest being cultivated further by India through this tour of the cultural artifacts of the whole of South India, including Tamil Nadu?
Absolutely. In fact, the Chinese president has a lot of time constraint. He has to fly out to Nepal. So the program has already well shot ahead of its time, but still the Chinese president, being a history and culture enthusiast, is taking time out to watch this. They've actually gone to the delegation level talks, talks with Prime Minister Modi. So in that sense, the hard-nosed diplomacy is over. But the very fact that the visiting dignitary is taking a time out and actually visiting live workstations and the workshops there and seeing how it is made speaks of the great interest that he has in this, in art, in culture, in artifacts, and how he's taking active interest as the Prime Minister personally explains it to him, and he sees for himself that how it is being, how this artwork is made, and how what sort of labor and skill is used in making of such artwork. So it speaks of how interested he is in this. It speaks about his personality, and it also speaks about that how he values the culture and the tradition that is being showcased to him. So clearly that augurs well for soft diplomacy. The idea of the Wuhan summit and the Mamallapuram summit was, the informal summit was, to do it in settings which are informal, which are more relaxed, which are not as stiff collars as happened in the confines of the Hyderabad House in Delhi. So clearly that objective seems to have been achieved, and as Prime Minister himself said in his opening statement, that from Wuhan spirit to Chennai vision is the way forward.
And as India and China celebrate 70 years of their diplomatic ties, would you say that cultural contacts are set to play a key role? Because I understand that the Chinese president had participated in an event commemorating 70 years of diplomatic ties with India before flying in to Delhi. So would you say that cultural contacts remains a key element as India and China celebrate 70 years of their diplomatic ties?
Absolutely, Munmun, and these optics the symbolism of it will go a long way in furthering the people-to-people contact. There's a huge potential. We are both old civilizations, 2,000-year-old civilizations, where the Prime Minister and the visiting president stand looking out at the Bay of Bengal, and the gentle sea breeze blew into their face and about sticky issues and the need to manage their disputes prudently, as the Prime Minister put it in his own words. They will move to the Bay of Bengal. Right now, I am looking at the Bay of Bengal. I can tell you, there is a feeling that this is the land which our relations go back to 7th century AD, where Buddhism traveled from this land to China, Zen Buddhism, and from there, we had great ties. It still came out here, and you see it today, an art form in the Mamallapuram silk saree. So
absolutely.
It's the people-to-people contact, it will surely do. Another important thing that even by the two leaders who are sitting here and speaking in Mamallapuram, back in Beijing, the Indian embassy put out a press release saying that the visa regime has been liberalized. They put various categories of e-visa and reduced fee for that to boost that people-to-people connect. So we expect in some time the results of both countries to come out, and I think that could figure prominently in that readout.
Right, Amrit, besides that, what are the other engagements that we are looking at? I understand that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be hosting Chinese President Xi Jinping to a lunch now.
Munmun, could you please repeat your question?
Is the remaining engagement the lunch now between the two leaders?
That's right. That's right. The Prime Minister now hosts the lunch for the Chinese president, and from after the lunch, he travels by road from the Fisherman's Cove in Mamallapuram to Chennai, from where he flies out to Nepal.
Right, Amrit, we'll come back to you, but Prime Minister Narendra Modi currently giving a guided tour to Chinese President Xi Jinping of the various artifacts of South India and Tamil Nadu, including a Thanjavur painting. We earlier saw how Prime Minister gifted a Kanjivaram sari to Chinese President Xi Jinping, and like a correspondent was telling us, a Thanjavur painting could well also be one of the gifts that Prime Minister Narendra Modi could give to Chinese President Xi Jinping. But second day too, very high on cultural symbolism, on sartorial diplomacy, and we'll be going across later to our correspondent Amrit Pal. But your thoughts, Ambassador Kumar, on what we are seeing, second guided tour in a matter of 2 days, one of monuments and now of artifacts.
So I think actually that this is as much for the domestic Indian audience as well. Not many people in India might know the intricacies which you so beautifully described of either a Kanjivaram sari or a Thanjavur painting. I mean, those of us who come from the south will know it. But I'm very impressed with the way the Prime Minister himself has taken trouble to master it. But if you're going to explain it to the Chinese president, you have to know.
Yeah.
So I think he's very good at that. But I also think this is an important message for the domestic Indian audience, that the country has so much to offer. I remember him telling me in one of the meetings that each one of us should actually bring 4 of our relations for domestic travel within the country.
Yes, he's spoken that.
Yes, yes.
He's spoken, in fact, all that in his Mann Ki Baat addresses.
Absolutely. And he says that of Indians living abroad. He says that of Indians in India. So I think he takes a lot of pride in what India has to offer. No, but going back to your question, I mean, if I were to write the headline, hypothetically, and if I was the editor of a magazine, and if I were to write a headline for tomorrow, I would say Chennai restores Wuhan spirit.
Okay.
That would be my headline. Looking at it from every perspective, it seems to me there was a, and frankly, I'm not exaggerating, the last 6 months, I think there was a desperate need to restore the Wuhan spirit. I think if Mamallapuram and Chennai have restored that Wuhan spirit in terms of not allowing differences to become disputes, to try and have a better understanding of core interests, to take the relationship forward in areas that we can, like soft diplomacy you mentioned, but also people-to-people relationship. Your correspondent mentioned the e-visa regime of the Indian Embassy, you mentioned it as well. So I think this is really the way forward. I think what I also expect is there was a meeting between the 2 special representatives on the border issue which was postponed just before this summit, and that is when a lot of things happened. So I think one of the earliest things I would like to see is for that meeting to take place. The border talks have gone on for too long. I think we'll have to find a way forward. And if the directions are given to the special representatives, I hope that meeting will take place. The External Affairs Minister was in Beijing anyway, just before, I think, the summit. It was a month ago. So I think that relationship will go forward. But for me, as I said, slowly we will have to see what the core areas that were expressed in the one-to-one meeting. And more interestingly, as I said, I am dying to know what the specific proposals were. Because the Chinese president openly said, I will look at the proposals.
You're all very keen and curious to know that. For that, we'll have to wait for the briefing by the Ministry of External Affairs.
And I understand they're going to follow the same model as Wuhan, which is 2 separate statements.
But perhaps questions would be taken this time around by the MEA. They weren't taken yesterday for obvious reasons. But since you're referring to the border talks between the 2 sides, we know that this entire format that is there of special representatives began in 2003 when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was India's Prime Minister. He had travelled to China, and since then 21 such rounds of talks between special representatives have taken place. The last one was held sometime in November 2018. There are some sub-agreements, if I may say, that are some 5 to 6 in number that have already been reached between India and China. But I'll complete that question to you, but let me go across now to our correspondent Amrit Pal. Amrit, there is a lot of interest in the studio, and I'm sure outside as well, on what those key proposals are that Chinese President Xi Jinping referred to in his opening statement of the delegation level talks. Will we have to wait for the MEA press conference for that?
I'm as eager to know about it as you, Gungun. We'll only get to know once the lunch is over, the two leaders, finish with their engagements, and then those readouts are put out for us in the media to know what really transpired. We know what we know right now is that no joint statement has been planned as of now. There'll be separate readouts, but yes, they would be on similar lines, as in both sides would put out something which both sides would know what they're putting out. But we are told that it's not going to be a joint statement. What exactly are the proposals that President Xi referred to? We'll be able to know, say, about an hour's time from now.
You know, that's about what those proposals could possibly be. This is all in the realm of speculation. But our guest in the studio was also talking about the need to give fresh momentum to special representative level talks. 21 of them have already taken place since 2003 when this format of talks began. There were some unconfirmed reports that new or updated CBMs may be decided upon and that they may not be announced this time around. They may be announced maybe after the next level of SR level talks or after a round of defense officials talks. What are you picking up?
Yes, that is a very, very strong possibility, because that's really a low-hanging fruit. Because if you look at what transpired at Wuhan, the major takeaway from Wuhan was that the two leaders had agreed to give strategic military guidance to the respective armies. Now, Wuhan happened in 2018, and it was in the backdrop, it was the first informal meeting of its kind, both for the Chinese president and for the Indian Prime Minister. Never before had such sort of the diplomacy in this format been tried at the highest political level, and it came in the backdrop of Wuhan, Doklam crisis being diffused. What the two leaders had agreed to was that such things shouldn't be allowed to blow into such a crisis. Such flare-ups should not happen. And after that, we saw that such sort of a flare-up hasn't happened. Now, there is a disputed border. There's an unresolved border of about 4,000 kilometers, which we refer to as the line of actual control. Perceptions vary. The Chinese believe their border begins somewhere else. We believe our border begins somewhere else. There is a mechanism, as you said, called the SR level mechanism to resolve that. And and there are protocols in place for armies to diffuse situations if an eyeball to eyeball situation comes. The good thing is that since 1960s, not a shot has been fired there, and so in that sense, it's a calm border. But yes, incursions, transgressions, perceived transgressions do take place. Now, what will happen this time around is that these protocols or the CBMs would have been scaled, or the broad contours of scaling them up would have been discussed, and those announcements would have to wait for the SR level talks, basically because those protocols need to be put in place, and that's what the diplomats and the military officials would actually put, because that is where it happens. Say a CBM typically would be say if a company, how would the company commanders engage? How would a flag meeting happen? At what level does it need to be escalated to a higher level? And how to retreat? How to see that basically your soldiers, say of the PLA or the Indian Army, do not get into any sort of physical confrontation with each other, even if they come face to face. So things like that. Now, the nitty-gritties of all that, and those CBMs, there are CBMs in place, there are protocols in place, but things have changed a lot. You have better surveillance equipment, technologies changed, so you basically need to upgrade them. And I think that is the broad contours at the political level would have been discussed today. The nitty-gritties would be worked out, and when the SRs meet as SRs, though both the individuals who have been designated SRs were there today in that room and have been interacting with each other since yesterday. Wang Yi, their foreign minister, is their SR, and NSA Ajit Doval is the Indian SR. So they would have spoken about it. Once the nitty-gritties are put down on paper, the protocols are well established, they could announce that after the SR level talks. So
Yes.
that's what we expect as well.
Okay. Is expansion of counterterrorism cooperation on the cards as well?
That is what is being said, that counterterrorism figured in a major way during the talks between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi, as well as the delegation, their respective delegations today, because terror, as we heard yesterday, the Foreign Secretary say after the day one interaction which happened over dinner, and it was a very exhaustive interaction. The dinner lasted more than 2.5 hours, and before that also they spent about 4 hours together, close to about 5 hours together yesterday. So that this came up, and the Foreign Secretary said that radicalization and terror were, and how it affects multi-religious, multi-ethnic, diverse society as ours, and both China and India, and how it is a common challenge for us, and it is a common threat that we are facing, and we should work together towards combating that jointly. So that gave an indication of how important that issue is, and I'm sure that would have been discussed at length between the two leaders. Now, what sort of a cooperation, how does it take place? There is a military exercise that India and China jointly hold called Hand in Hand, which is essentially again a security and a counter-terror military exercise which happens in the jungles of northeast India and along the border with China. What form would this anti-terror cooperation take place? We'll have to wait for that. But yes, the issue would have been discussed threadbare and at length, Manman.
Besides bilateral issues, regional and global issues were also set to be discussed between the leaders today. One such issue is of RCEP negotiations, regional comprehensive economic partnership negotiations. The 8th ministerial of RCEP is currently underway in Bangkok, for which Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is present. It is expected that RCEP negotiations would be concluded by November this year. There are some reservations that the Indian industry has. Some parts of the industry are also looking forward to an RCEP. Do you think that Prime Minister would have approached this issue in a bid to make China understand that kind of priorities that India has with regard to protecting its domestic industry, yet being pro-free trade and globalization?
Absolutely. The Prime Minister Modi would, in my opinion, would have brought it up very, very strongly and very firmly with in a strong and manner with the Chinese president, that why the need to expand. When we talk about WTO reform and reforming global institutions, and China itself says that trade restrictions put by the US on it are hurting it, and it sees them as being not fair. So I think in the same spirit, the Prime Minister would have spoken about this to the Chinese president, saying that greater market access for Indian companies, for Indian products in China goes in that spirit. And if the trade relations need to be scaled up, and from an Indian point the trade deficit needs to be reduced, much more needs to be done, and RCEP negotiations will go a long way in that. So that point would have been made to the Chinese president. Of course, what the Chinese do is we'll know, and because every nation says something else, and finally when it comes to acting on it, keeps the basis of those actions or agreements is its own self-interests. So that is not exclusive to China. That's what all countries do. But the idea is to find a common ground and find the area where you can engage in a mutually beneficial relationship, which India believes that RCEP will lead down to that. So I think the Prime Minister would have put his political weight behind the RCEP and conveyed it to the Chinese side very, very in no uncertain terms.
Amrit, during Wuhan, the issue of reform of multilateral political and financial institutions did come up. Do you expect that this could have been perhaps a constant theme, a recurring theme this time around, with India pushing for a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council, India pushing for membership of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and India pushing for reforms of multilateral financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank so that
I'm
developing countries have a greater say?
Reform of the UN, entry into NSG, these things, I'm sure the Indian Prime Minister would have brought up to the Chinese President and mentioned them what China, because these are thorny and sticky issues which the Chinese may not be amenable to agreeing with you for reasons of geopolitics. But yes, the Indian side would have brought this up and shared their concerns and brought it up, what the Prime Minister said, that we need to be sensitive to each other's concerns. India would have explained its rationale for the need for getting into such bodies. But yes, when these things are brought up under the broad rubric
and
of
just hold your thoughts, Amrit. We are seeing hands clasped of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping, a warm handshake and a warmer handshake than usual, one would say. There were 2-3 handshakes yesterday. There was 3 times we saw how there was a golf cart ride. And I mean, Amrit, if you are still with us, we are looking at Prime Minister Narendra Modi seeing off Chinese President Xi Jinping. So are they now going to a venue for the lunch?
Yes, the lunch is in the Fisherman's Cove. It's a huge property, so they will be going to a separate part of the Fisherman's Cove. It's a Taj property, so where an elaborate lunch has been hosted by Prime Minister Modi for President Xi, and I think they are now after the one-on-one and the delegation level talk and the visit to the exhibition where artifacts were on display and the gifts. Giving gift ceremony is over. Now they are moving for the lunch.
And what's on the menu? Is it as elaborate as the Taste of India?
Yes, the cuisine has been very specially laid out. It includes Tamil cuisine, which was we saw at the dinner yesterday, and President Xi, we are told, enjoyed it a lot. But this is a more elaborate cuisine than just Tamil. It includes both vegetarian and non-vegetarian dishes, but it's not restricted just to the Tamil cuisine. It's a more elaborate cuisine that's put out for the Chinese president and his delegation.
Right, Amrit. So, back to the issue that we were discussing on how both countries want more say for developing countries and multilateral institutions. We are seeing, in fact, now live visuals, I understand, of Prime Minister waving to Chinese President Xi Jinping. And as our correspondent Amrit Pal has been telling us, the venue is very much in Fisherman's Cove, but it is some distance away. So the Chinese President may have decided to take his car to the venue. We've seen quality time being spent by the two leaders together on the Coromandel coast, overlooking the Bay of Bengal. Thrice at least today, taking a golf cart and a stroll as well, walking down the red carpet, a very, very warm handshake a short while back, and now all eyes will be on the lunch and later on the briefing by the Ministry of External Affairs on the outcomes. Some could be tangible, some could be intangible, of the Mamallapuram summit. Amrit continues to be with us. Yes, Amrit, we were talking about how there are convergences of opinion with regard to reform of multilateral institutions.
Yes, there are both divergences and convergences. The idea would have been to reduce the divergences, and even if the other side does not agree to it or is not right now at a step where it wants to go forward on to that, but they understand your sensitivities on areas of divergences, and at least, as the Prime Minister said, manage them prudently and not allowing them to flare up and become disputes. A term phraseology first used by the present External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, when he was the then Foreign Secretary, in the wake of Doklam and the efforts to resolve it. But that would be on the divergences, but on the convergences, you both are from the developing countries, you are both growing economies, you are both the engines of growth of the world, where after the economic slowdown, the first world economies,
and we are seeing, in fact, the carcade now. Amrit, hold your thoughts of Chinese President Xi Jinping Understand that they'll be now going for the lunch that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be hosting for Chinese President Xi Jinping. That will in fact be the last engagement of sorts in an informal summit at Mamallapuram. 24 hours of a lot of camaraderie, of a lot of bonding between the two sides. So Amrit, we've seen the Chinese president take his carcade. Is he headed to the venue for lunch?
That's what I understand.
Okay.
That after the lunch he would move out because I am at a little distance, but that's what I see what you see, Munmun.
Okay. Now, having said that, one fresh takeaway from the Wuhan summit, Amrit, was cooperation in third countries. Perhaps no one would have imagined, no strategic expert, that India and China would be cooperating in a country like Afghanistan to train Afghan diplomats. There were some unconfirmed reports that this cooperation could be taken forward by way of training of, say, other civil officials in Afghanistan. Anything you're picking up on that?
I would see a lot of reason to believe that there would be further movement on that. There would be broad basing of that cooperation. That cooperation, which has been limited to the diplomats, may now be expanded to other agencies like law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, bureaucrats, civil servants, and broad basing them. The first batch of the Afghan diplomats have been trained here in Delhi. After that, they were trained in Beijing, and I think that project has worked out well, and the two sides there is much reason to believe that the two sides would have agreed to broad base it, because there were no hiccups on that went on pretty smoothly. And Afghanistan is a country which needs human resource development, and India and China being important players in the region, and if they agree on working together towards that. So it's not just Afghanistan which benefits, of course the direct beneficiary is Afghanistan, but it also sets the mood for a healthy cooperation in the region and sends out a message of how conflicts of interest can be managed well, and areas of convergence while those conflict of interests may operate on a different plane, but this forward movement can be made in areas where you can converge.
Amrit, I'm getting information that the president has departed for the airport. So we are yet to know on whether it was a short lunch or whether they decided to skip the lunch.
I'm sure there was a lunch hosted for. So I understand that the lunch would have finished now if the carcade is moving, because Manman, you'll have to understand.
Yes, there is information that the lunch has taken place already.
All right, so the lunch is finished, and now the president of China, along with his delegation, departs for Chennai on a road trip. It's about a 50-55 kilometer road journey, and he goes down to the international airport in Chennai, from where he takes off for Nepal.
I don't know, Amrit, whether you've come across this media report, but I found it quite interesting that along that 56-58 kilometer stretch between Chennai and Mamallapuram, there is a maternity center that was inaugurated in 1956 by the then visiting Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai. And it so happened that he was moving on that stretch, and there was an inauguration of a maternity center that was to take place, and those who were behind the maternity center, just stopped him impromptu, and he just came out and inaugurated the center. So that maternity center still stands there. So now the Chinese president would be once again walking past, or his carcade would be moving past that maternity center. An interesting bit of information, I thought.
Yeah, it's a very interesting tidbit. These spontaneous things that come up, they show that how the role of human agency, and that's what precisely Prime Minister Modi and President Xi are trying to do from the journey from which began with the Wuhan spirit and has now gone on to the next level to the Chennai vision, is precisely that the role of the individual agency can play a very important role sometimes in shaping world history. Countries, yes, act within the ambit of their interests, of their national interests, of their perceived interests, but to sometimes to break impasse or to take a leap forward, as we have seen in other instances, but a few instances, individuals have or political leaders have played an important role by their individual agency. And I think when such incidents happen and such sort of a connect happens, it sets the right kind of settings. Of course, as the Chinese president, it is his job to protect the Chinese interest, or what he believes are the Chinese interests, and he will the actions of China will be based on that. But it surely opens up the individual. The person is more open to engagement, and these incidents sort of set they sort of set the mood for that, and they set the framework for that open-minded, open-hearted engagement in which sides are ready to give and take and then move forward.
Amrit, in the Wuhan summit, there was another understanding that India and China would work to pool together their resources and capabilities in order to combat global challenges like fighting poverty, fighting climate change, working towards sustainable development, and also, moving towards digital transformation and inclusion. There are various national programs that India has to be able to attain these national goals, some of which are also one of some of those 17 sustainable development goals that India has committed to, and so has China. Do you expect some forward movement in this area as well?
Absolutely, one could expect forward movement in that, because both countries are developing countries. The challenges that they face are similar. China, in some respects, is ahead of you in terms of infrastructure building, in terms of lifting people out of poverty. India, being a democracy, has much more to share with China. Now, these are experiences that countries can share, not just at an experience sharing level, but from they can learn from each other, and they can get into a sort of cooperative relationship, into a mutually beneficial relationship. Say, building cities, building smart cities, building infrastructure, achieving efficiency is something India can surely learn from China. The spirit of democracy, celebrating diversity, allowing the space for different voices and sometimes conflicting interests to play out, and then to let that play out, resolve itself, and to a better outcome is something China can look at India towards. So, as I was saying, that the two sides yesterday, even at the last year when at Wuhan, it was essentially they displaying, or Chinese putting out, that how such an old civilization they are. And Mamallapuram, when he visited, when the Chinese president visited these sites, it was essentially a showcase of he was getting to see a very, very old civilization which carries those traditions of non-violence, of humanism, of accommodation, of negotiation through accommodation. So there are things that these countries can learn from each other, and I think that's the Mamallapuram spirit which the Prime Minister uses. To use the Prime Minister's term, the Chennai vision is essentially that engage with each other and move forward, give fresh impetus and momentum to the existing ties, and prudently manage your differences.
Amrit, the informal summit has now come to an end with the lunch over, and the Chinese president heading to the Chennai airport. He moves on to Nepal next. What would you say were the watershed moments this time around? We still remember that the Wuhan summit was remembered for that walk along the garden and the boat ride. According to you, what are the watershed moments of the Chennai or Mamallapuram summit?
The journey that the president took from right from the Chennai airport. He, in fact, is reported to have said, this is what the Foreign Secretary told us, that he said that I was touched and by the welcome and overwhelmed by the welcome that he received. It was a grand welcome given to the Chinese president at the airport itself. There were about 350 cultural performers there depicting various dances and music. the region of Tamil Nadu. Then people lining up along the East Coast Road. It's a beautiful road that runs along the sea coast, along the Bay of Bengal, on the eastern coast bed of India. So people coming up from the villages along that road to catch a glimpse of the Chinese president. You talking about his interaction at the maternity home, and then coming, the Prime Minister receiving him. He actually at the Arjuna's penance, and then explaining to him what it was and how a rock was cut and a cave was cut and how it is made out of that and what it symbolizes. Then having tender coconut water by sitting in the beautiful settings of the Panch Rath, going down at the Shore Temple, going through a cultural performance. So it was basically, he was quite touched, and I think these were the watershed moments when he saw the diversity of a country as diverse and as a country which has such a rich traditions. So I think that would have really left an impression on his mind. Behind, you were talking about the warm smiles and the warm handshakes. Behind these warm smiles and the firm handshakes, there is hard-nosed diplomacy that has surely taken place. And it is also true that the Chennai summit, the Mamallapuram summit, is not going to resolve all your differences. But it has sort of given you a vision and to move forward in the areas that you easily can and approach the sticky areas or the thorny issues with a spirit of positive engagement. So I think that whole setting and that whole spirit to approach it is the watershed moment of this two-day summit. The words that the Prime Minister used, from Wuhan spirit to Chennai vision.
Okay. Stay with us, Amrit. Let me take some inputs from the guest in the studio. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, there's a tweet that I'm reading from of Ravish Kumar, from Wuhan spirit to Chennai vision, like a correspondent also spoke about. Beginning of a new era of cooperation as PM Narendra Modi and President Xi discuss wide-ranging issues at the delegation level talks. So, is it the beginning of a new era?
I would say that events in the near future will incontestably prove whether it is a vision. I think if the leaders have spelt out a vision, I'd like to see that in the separate statements which will be put out by the two sides, and I'm sure there is if the spokesman is saying it. But whether the two countries will adhere to the vision, I would be a little bit more cautious and say that I will watch Chinese statements and Chinese actions very carefully, as they will your statements and your actions, and it could well turn out to be that both countries have decided that there is this vision of cooperation for the future. So I think there is a good possibility it will happen, but as a cautious diplomat, and you will forgive me for being that, I can't change myself, I've been that for 36 years, I would say the jury is out, and I would watch Chinese statements and Chinese actions very carefully.
In terms of the Asia-Pacific region, do you expect that some conversation would have happened in view of India's inclusive vision of Asia-Pacific and India's Act East policy, and how India sees China play a key role in that?
I think that's a very good point you raise. The problem for India, when we explain to China, is in trying to convince them that the Indo-Pacific construct, which is a strategic construct, is not aimed at China.
It is not like the Western construct of the clash of civilizations.
Exactly. So the Prime Minister, in his Shangri-La dialogue speech of 2018, famously said that the Indo-Pacific is not aimed at somebody, and the Foreign Minister has gone on to say, Dr. Jaishankar said recently, that the Indo-Pacific is for something, it is not against something. But the Chinese, I think, have seen it as being directed against them, frankly. And that is something the Prime Minister would have gone to a lot of length to convince the Chinese President that, listen, this is an inclusive grouping, and this is about trying to keep the sea lanes of communication open, both Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, trying to deal with maritime security, trying to deal with economic prosperity in all the littoral states of the Indian and Pacific Ocean. So how far the Chinese buy that, we'll have to see. Because the American conception of Indo-Pacific, you said Western, but let's be honest, the American conception of Indo-Pacific is a little bit more precise. They see the Chinese actions in the Indo-Pacific area as posing a threat to free societies. So that is a balancing act, frankly, that the Indian Prime Minister would have walked vis-a-vis the Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Now, we expect a briefing to take place at the Ministry of External Affairs. Perhaps that will be my next question to my correspondent whenever we get them through, as to when that briefing is expected, because the real outcomes, tangible or intangible, whatever they are, would be known from that press briefing, wherein questions would also be allowed perhaps this time around. Now, we've discussed a whole lot of issues on what could have been on the table of the Mamallapuram summit and how it consolidates the outcomes from the Wuhan summit. Now, as two regional heavyweights who have their national visions, national priorities, also competing regional and global interests to an extent, our correspondent spoke about how countries act in their self-interest, sometimes keeping common global good aside, sometimes towing the line of common global good. So all in all, where do you see the direction of this relationship in the bilateral, regional and global context going?
So I really see no choice for China and India. To some extent, you can paraphrase an old English saying that they are condemned to coexist. I mean, that's a slightly negative way of putting it. But I think really there is no choice for China and India except to cooperate and try to see how they can enlarge their areas of cooperation. Sure, they will compete in some areas, and sure, they will have some differences in some areas, but as long as you can keep enlarging the scope of cooperation, you will hopefully manage the relationship, and that is the prudent management of the relationship that you refer to, the Prime Minister spoke about. You try to see how you can minimize the differences. For example, I mean, you talked a little bit earlier to your correspondent about regional cooperation. For example, climate change is an area where China and India have exactly the same interest. WTO is another area where our differences are not very different. Agriculture is an area where China and India don't differ that much. So there are areas of cooperation where I think China and India can do a lot of things together. And I think one of the things about the vision, if and when we come to know about this, would be that you try to focus on areas where China and India, if they join, then they become a force for good in the world. And that is something, and it's a fact. We have seen in international fora that if China and India join hands, it's very difficult for others to veto it. Because both countries, as you rightly say, are powers, and they represent what? Almost 30% of humanity, not to mention GDP and so on. Sure, China is ahead, but even so, I think with China and India, then it becomes very difficult for other countries to kind of contest it. So I can see a lot of future for the relationship, provided both countries respect their core concerns and we keep divergences and differences to a minimum. That's, I think, the key.
Trust deficit translating into cooperation dividend, would you say, by the end of the summit?
Yes,
at least
yes, without a doubt. I think summits
step towards that direction. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, summits like this certainly diminish the trust deficit. I totally agree with you. And that's one of the good things about the summit. But I think you need constant actions from both countries to kind of focus on areas of convergence and take it forward. And that's always a challenge.
There was a reference to Chinese newspapers in the opening statement of President Xi Jinping, saying that of late there have been a lot of articles on the possibilities that are there and on the friendly ties that are there between India and China. Media plays a key role in shaping public opinion in any country, be it India or China. In China, we know it's state-controlled. In India, it's a free press. So how do you see that reference to Chinese newspapers by the Chinese president?
So I think it's very refreshing that the Chinese president referred to it, because when I made these visits, and I've gone thrice over the last 1 year, I have to tell you honestly and your viewers that the Chinese press sometimes can focus on the lack of development in India, and that's a fact. Sometimes they try to focus how India is so much behind the game vis-a-vis China's phenomenal development, and maybe in some areas that is true, but I've always felt that the media can play an important role, and you're quite right. The media can be a force for good if it can try to focus on what is positive. And one of the things that this summit will do, and because of the nature of society which you described in China, the Chinese press will try and focus on, for example, the culture of Tamil Nadu, what is on offer, the various cultural artifacts that we talked about, the personal chemistry between the leaders. One of the I go back to how I started this program with you, the subliminal message. The subliminal message for India is also that while China may be 5 times India's GDP, we are still talking as equals. That is also a subliminal message. You kept saying that both are powers, and I agree with you, but there is a power gap, and sometimes you can accentuate the power gap. But one of the subliminal messages of this summit meeting is we are talking to China as an equal. We are as old a civilization, as important a country, and you're trying to deal with them on an equal footing. That is the other subliminal message that goes out of this Mamallapuram summit, in my view.
What do you think has been the low-hanging fruit in the Mamallapuram summit? Would you say educational exchanges, youth exchanges, sports exchanges, cultural exchanges, media exchanges are some aspects of the relationship which are not very difficult to deal with and perhaps are low-hanging fruit, and they ultimately help in fostering stronger ties between people, which does have an impact on bilateral relationship?
I think you're right. Certainly people-to-people exchanges, broadly speaking, is a low-hanging fruit. Trade should be a low-hanging fruit, in my view. If they can sort out some of the barriers that Indian products and services and their exports are facing in China, that can be a low-hanging fruit. Chinese investment in India is extremely important for India's Make in India project. And therefore, that is something that we can talk about. If there are barriers to Chinese investment, we would like to remove them so that we attract more investment. So there are some low-hanging fruits for sure. You're right, and I hope they are addressed. But we will get a sense once we look at the separate joint statements.
Since you look at the trade and investment sphere also very keenly, the Foreign Secretary spoke about how the two leaders had yesterday discussed new areas of investment. India has an edge in services, it has an edge in IT outsourcing and consulting, whereas China has an edge in, say, artificial intelligence, quantum communication, etc. So, you know, the newer areas of the next industrial revolution. So how can there be complementarities in this cooperation? What are the newer areas of investment that you think both sides would be interested in?
So one of the areas where China has clearly stolen a march vis-a-vis India is, as you say, artificial intelligence, robotics, and what is broadly known as the fourth industrial revolution. They have managed to spend a lot of money on research and development. In that area, one key decision that the Chinese would have raised with India would have been the Huawei 5G issue. You know, as you know, India is moving towards 5G when it comes to mobile telephony and so on. And one of the important decisions that India has to make is whether to allow Huawei's 5G into India. There are some security concerns which the Western countries have already outlined, particularly the United States. So India will be called upon to make a very, very important decision in this regard. I don't know what the decision will be, but areas like artificial intelligence, robotics, and 5G are areas where conceivably we can benefit from Chinese investment. But you will have to be clear that your national security concerns are respected. So that's an area which is, in my view, not so straightforward, but it's an area where I think we will need to talk and we will need to convince each other that our interests are the same.
In fact, on the gifts of Prime Minister Narendra Modi for Chinese President, there's a hand-woven silk portrait of the President that we earlier saw. That was created by master weavers of Sri Ramalenga Sodam Bigai Handloom Weavers Cooperative Society in Siru Mugai Pudur in Coimbatore district, and that took 5 days of weaving to create this. Would you say that such gifts which are momentous, they are a lasting aspect of any relationship? We've seen this culture of exchange of gifts between, say, the Indian leadership and the Bangladesh leadership. Prime Minister makes it a point to gift items that are symbolic of Indian heritage in some way or the other to foreign dignitaries when he goes to meet them or when they come visiting. So, are these the more durable symbols of a lasting relationship?
That's a very interesting question. I've noticed that the Western approach to gifts is very different from the Orient or Eastern approach to gifts. There is an importance attached to gifts more in the Oriental societies, and both India and China are, after all, Eastern or Southern or Oriental societies. In our cultures, gift is very important. It is true that many of the gifts that the Prime Minister receives actually ends up in the Toshakhana of the Ministry of External Affairs, and sometimes it is auctioned and so on. But I think for a leader like Xi Jinping, who is now more or less the president for an indefinite period of time, to give him that fabric that you so eloquently talked about in terms of having his portrait, that I think is a touching gesture by the Prime Minister. That is not an ordinary gift. It's not like gifting him a Tanjavur copper plate. This is something else. You're
This
giving
is more
him,
personalized in
correct,
nature.
correct. So I think those gifts, I would say, have a way of impacting your interlocutor. I mean, you cannot but be touched by such gifts. So this is something that happens. But I would say, on the whole, it is the Oriental societies which emphasize more on gifts than Western societies.
The Chinese President said in his opening statement that I'm overwhelmed by the welcome that I've been accorded in India, and it's going to be a memorable experience for me and all those back in China, and it will have a far-reaching impact. Does that underline the success of the Chennai Connect?
At one level, it is normal for a head of state who has received a welcome like this to say, I'm touched by the overwhelming hospitality. I mean, what else can he say? Frankly, we have gone to a lot of trouble. Mamallapuram is an excellent locale. You have talked so much about the pristine environment, so he is being formal when he says it. But I thought he was being very sincere when he said that, listen, you've gone to so much trouble, and I am truly overwhelmed by the beautifully choreographed thing that we saw yesterday, especially. I thought the real, when you asked your correspondent what was the moment of this Mamallapuram summit, for me it was the two leaders standing with the Krishna's butterball in the background, and
Yes.
I thought that was a splendid photograph, which will, I think, outlast this trip completely.
And you
So-
have it behind you.
Yes, exactly.
You just have it behind you, the watershed moment
Oh,
that
that's
you
right.
just described.
I have to thank you for, and your colleagues for this. But that's precisely what I'm talking about. I think that was fantastic. So I thought the president of Xi Jinping was genuinely sincere when he said that I'm touched by the hospitality. And mind you, the Chinese are also great at this kind of hospitality. And again, I would make a distinction between Western societies and Oriental societies. It is Oriental societies which have a way of overwhelming you with hospitality. It is a show of affection and respect for the country, as the Prime Minister often says when he receives this kind of hospitality. It is India. It is India which receives it. It's not. We are not doing it for President Xi Jinping. We are doing it also because we respect our ties with China. So I think that is really the backdrop against which it should be seen.
Is it only a matter of coincidence that when PM visited China, he was hosted at the Temple of Heavens, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and at Mamallapuram we are seeing around 40 monuments that have the designation of UNESCO World Heritage Site?
So maybe this is a good time for me to conclude your show by talking again of subliminal messages. both the Chinese and the Indians are very good at subliminal messaging. You know, you take somebody to a location.
Just hold your thoughts. We'll take that point forward.
Sure.
But we are now getting visuals of Chinese President Xi Jinping having arrived at the Chennai airport. He'll be departing from here for Nepal, and we're also getting information that the briefing, that is the media briefing of the Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale, has also begun on the outcomes. But we saw the kind of warm reception with cultural troops singing and dancing in vibrant colors that President Xi got the Foreign Secretary yesterday, and the President himself spoke of the warm hospitality, saying that this is going to have a far-reaching impact for the peoples of the two countries. So a historic visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping for the second informal summit now finally coming to an end. 24 hours is what he spent in India, but that was quality time that he spent with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and the beautiful locales, the lush greens.
Second India-China informal summit. You must have seen the visuals playing out on television screens yesterday and today. I have with me the Foreign Secretary of India, Shri Vijay Gokhale. I also have Joint Secretary East Asia in the Ministry of External Affairs, Naveen Srivastava, who will take us through the discussions today and also yesterday what transpired in the meetings between the two leaders. After the initial remarks by the Foreign Secretary, we will open the floor to questions. We will take questions in a bunch of 3. Please identify yourself, which is your name and the organization. And please raise your hand. I will identify you, and then you can ask your questions. There are mics which will be given to you. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ravish. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. President Xi Jinping and his delegation have just departed from the venue for the second informal summit. This morning, in the follow-up to yesterday's meeting between Prime Minister and President Xi Jinping, the two leaders had another conversation of almost 90 minutes on a one-to-one basis. And that was followed up with talks at the delegation level between the two delegations, followed by Prime Ministers hosting a lunch in honor of President Xi Jinping and his delegation. So in all, the two leaders have had 6 hours of direct discussion on a one-to-one basis. You would have seen the media remarks made by both leaders at the delegation level talks. The Prime Minister has spoken of the Chennai Connect as a follow-up to the Wuhan spirit. And while I'm sure you have also carefully followed the remarks made by President Xi to the media, I wanted to flag some of the points that he had made. He felt that Prime Minister had sincerely welcomed him to India. He spoke of the informal summit as having produced visible progress. He described his experience in India as a memorable one, and that he had enjoyed discussions with the Prime Minister. And both President Xi Jinping and the Prime Minister have conveyed their appreciation to the government, the state government of Tamil Nadu, for the excellent arrangements, including the very grand welcome that President Xi Jinping was given. The President himself spoke of the welcome and of the warmth with which public in Chennai has received him and his delegation. The discussions focused on what had happened after the Wuhan summit in the past approximately year and a half. And both leaders have agreed that many of the dialogue mechanisms which have been formed or which have been reformed since the Wuhan summit has created a very good momentum in the relationship, and that the engagement between India and China across all sectors has intensified. They also agreed that strategic communications have deepened and that this should be continued, and both leaders have therefore agreed that the informal summit provides a very good platform for the leaderships to engage, and President Xi Jinping endorsed the idea that we should continue these informal summits between the leaders of India and China in the future. There was a good conversation on trade. As you know, this is an issue which has been of concern here back home. And President Xi Jinping, after hearing out our Prime Minister on this issue, said that China is ready to take sincere action in this regard and to discuss in a very concrete way how to reduce the trade deficit. Now, one of the important understandings that the two leaders reached, therefore, was that a new mechanism will be established to discuss trade, investment and services. This will be at an elevated level. From the Chinese side, it would be the Vice Premier. His name is Mr. Hu Chunhua. From the Indian side, it will be the Finance Minister of India, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman. The decision on when and how this mechanism is to be activated will of course be done now through diplomatic channels. This is not something the leaders go through. And President Xi Jinping also then welcomed investments from India into China, including in the information technology and pharmaceuticals sectors. The two leaders also agreed that they should explore through this new mechanism the possibility of establishing manufacturing partnerships. And Prime Minister suggested that both sides could identify certain sectors, certain specific industries where investment could come in and where manufacturing would help create employment, create jobs, and enhance the market for both sides. Obviously, when trade is being discussed, one of the issues briefly touched upon was the RCEP, the 16-member, the discussions between 16 countries on forming a common regional trading agreement. And Prime Minister specifically said in this regard that India looks forward to this, but that it is important that RCEP is balanced, that a balance is maintained between trade in goods, trade in services and investment. And President Xi noted this and said that China and India are ready to discuss this further and that Indian concerns will be taken into account. It was a brief discussion, but it is an important point. President Xi raised the issue of engaging more on the defense and security side. He said that there was a brief review of the ongoing exchanges and cooperation, after which the President of China said we need to step up engagement in this area. This will enhance mutual trust between the two militaries and the security forces. And they have extended an invitation to the Raksha Mantri, our defense minister, to visit China. Again, the dates, the timing, and so on will be discussed through diplomatic channels. The two leaders had a fairly long discussion on people-to-people relations, and both Prime Minister and President Xi agreed that we need public opinion in both countries to broad base the relationship that we have between India and China. And to this extent, under this rubric, a number of issues were discussed. The first, of course, being the 70th anniversary of India-China relations next year. We have agreed that 70 events will be celebrated, 35 on each side. This has been more or less decided what sort of events these will be. And in effect, it means that there will be at least one event each week in the anniversary year, either in India or in China. And both leaders agreed that this sort of intensive propagation of the public side of the relationship should in fact lead to public opinion on both sides being engaged in the relationship. The Prime Minister also specifically proposed that we need to give greater emphasis on tourism in both directions, and he felt that the 70th anniversary of China's liberation, which was just celebrated this year, and the 75th anniversary of the independence of India would be the two milestone years in which we should look to significantly enhance tourism from the existing levels to a new level. And in that regard, the Prime Minister also suggested that in order to enhance P2P contact between the public in both sides, we should also look, among other things, at homestay. And President Xi Jinping gave a positive response to this particular suggestion. President Xi spoke of greater facilitation for yatris going to the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, and Prime Minister suggested a number of ideas on the connect between the state of Tamil Nadu and the Fujian province of China. This was the province in which the city of Quanzhou is located, where recently or in the last decade or so, Tamil inscriptions and fragments of a temple, Shaivite temple, have been discovered, and where there is now increasing evidence that traders from Tamil Nadu as well as from other parts of southern India actually established communities. Therefore, among the various ideas is joint research on how we can explain to our own public this connect that is there between the Tamil Nadu and Fujian. There was a decision to establish sister state relations between Tamil Nadu of India and Fujian of China, and various other initiatives in this regard. The idea is that we also strengthen the connection between southern India and China in the same way that Buddhism was a connect between the northern part of India and China. There was some discussion on international and regional issues. Both President Xi and Prime Minister emphasized the importance of both countries having independent and autonomous foreign policies. President Xi said that in the light of this, both sides need to have many more intensive discussions, promote understanding, understand each other's perspective on major global and regional issues. They both agreed that it is important to strengthen a rules-based order in the international trading system, that the World Trade Organization is a central pillar of the global trading system, and that in the process of reform, both sides should work together. Both sides have also had a brief exchange on climate change, on the responsibilities that Government of India and China are taking in enhancing our own consciousness towards environmental protection and climate change. Both have also agreed that we need to maintain a closer contact on international issues and on regional issues, and among these, some of them discussed included Afghanistan. Finally, President Xi Jinping has invited Prime Minister to China for the next informal summit. This will obviously be at a mutually agreed time, and the Prime Minister has accepted this invitation with pleasure. So I would certainly sum up the events of the last 2 days in the following way. In the first place, there was excellent discussion between the two leaders, and what has come out of this summit is the role of leadership in both countries in steering our relationship into a forward-looking direction. Both Prime Minister and President Xi Jinping mentioned that we need to look to the future. Secondly, Prime Minister's description of the outcome as Chennai Connect in the follow-up to the Wuhan spirit. Thirdly, both sides agreed to consolidate strategic communications, to enhance it at all levels, to talk and share about any issues that we have, to build mutual trust, including between the militaries. Fourthly, we agreed that there would be greater understanding shown on trade relations and on our sensitivities relating to trade. We would try to find a way forward in addressing the trade deficit. A new mechanism at an elevated level would be created in order to talk about trade issues. Fifthly, we both agreed that it was important to deal with the challenges of terrorism and radicalization in an increasingly complex world, and where our own societies were diverse, and both leaders were leaders of countries which were not only large in terms of area and population, but also in terms of diversity. Lastly, but not the least, there was a new focus on people-to-people relations, an understanding between both leaders that the public in both countries, and we constitute between the two countries 2.7 billion people, the public of both countries need to be brought into the relationship, that the relationship needs to be predicated on how the public benefits in both countries, and a number of ideas were exchanged on how we can build P2P relations. Obviously, it now falls upon the official levels, the two foreign ministries, the other departments of the Government of India and their counterparts in China to concretize the outcomes of the Chennai summit and to see how we can carry this relationship forward. But I will only conclude by saying that prior to his departure, just a very short while ago from the summit venue, the President did convey to Prime Minister that he was very satisfied with the discussions. He enjoyed talking to the Prime Minister. He looks forward to receiving the Prime Minister in China next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I'll take the first set of 3 questions. Yes, please. No, behind Abhishek. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Foreign Secretary, my name is Anshul Vora with Al Jazeera, and I'd like to ask you if you could provide us more details on what sort of assurances has India got when it comes to the trade deficit in the pharmaceutical sector and others. Will Indian companies get more access to Chinese markets or not? Because this issue has been discussed many times, but nothing, we don't really know what sort of progress has been made. So has any assurances been made? And just very briefly, the second question, if Kashmir in any way was raised or not, because some analysts have said that this visit was actually overshadowed by the events in Kashmir, and China and India have not agreed on the recent decision taken by the Indian
Thank you.
government.
Abhishek?
So this is Abhishek from Republic TV. Just to add to Achal's question on Kashmir, were we able to communicate to the Chinese side about our not liking the manner in which they have conducted themselves, even being provocative on the issue of Kashmir? Do we have, or do the Chinese have better appreciation of Pakistan's role in Kashmir?
Thank you. Geeta?
Geeta Mohan with India Today. The question is on radicalization. A lot of discussion on radicalization and terrorism. Were there specific areas that Prime Minister Narendra Modi raised with regards to Pak-based terrorists and terrorism emanating from Pakistan?
Thank you.
Thank you. Achal, obviously when such issues are discussed at leadership level, the leadership does not go into details. It sets the direction. And it has, in this case, not merely set a direction, it has also decided to establish a mechanism at high level to talk of how we can balance trade. So in this regard, I think it is a very positive development that has taken place. From our side, the finance minister, and from the Chinese side, the vice premier will now meet. I presume during those discussions, specific details will be discussed on how our trade deficit will be addressed. Since both Achal and Abhishek referred to Jammu and Kashmir, I would like to state quite categorically that this issue was not raised and not discussed, and therefore there is no question of my making any further comments on the matter. In any case, the Government of India's position, as expressed publicly, is very clear. This is a matter that concerns the internal affairs of the country. Geeta, as far as radicalization and terrorism is concerned, as you know, the objective of the informal summit is to have an overarching discussion on a strategic plane. And I think the leadership therefore focused on what sort of threats were there to complex societies like ours, which are not unitary societies, on how we should work together to combat it. There were no specific discussions of any kind as to, but the global threat that was there, including from ISIS and Daesh, were discussed. But again, a detailed discussion is not possible. They had a number of events and a number of issues to cover. And in that context, the main point that was agreed by the two sides is that for a country like China and a country like India, increasing radicalization is something which is in neither's interest. Well, of course, since Prime Minister Imran Khan had visited China, the President of China talked about his visit.
Thank you. Nainima?
This is Nainima Basu from the print. Just want to understand also on trade, were there any discussions on services trade, relaxation of visas for Indian professionals? And also on defense cooperation, has the Chinese side offered any platforms in terms of warships, fighter jets, anything like that? If you can shed the light.
Thank you. Indrani?
Foreign Secretary, you said that there was visible progress that between Wuhan and Chennai. If you could detail what you consider to be visible progress between the two
Thank you.
countries.
One more. Sandeep?
Foreign Secretary, about 3-4 years ago, a government source had said that advances in technology had will lead to incorporation of new confidence building, new elements to the confidence building measures for peace and tranquility on the border. So could you tell us what are the new technologies that have come up and whether more additions were made?
Thank you. Nainima, as I have already said on the trade side, this new mechanism that has been established will discuss such issues, including the question of relaxation in visas and so on. This is not a discussion that is normally done at the leadership level. As far as defense is concerned, acquisitions are a matter which are handled by the Ministry of Defense. Again, these are not issues that are gone into at the leadership level, so I will be unable to comment on this. Indrani, as far as what you talk about details about the visible progress, I think we should recognize that since the Wuhan summit, at the political level, there have been significant exchanges. At the economic and trade levels, there is a greater recognition by China, and to that extent, we have been able to put on the table that the trade deficit is an economically sustainable one, and it is also something which is sensitive to our domestic industry. And I think there, the fact that President Xi Jinping understood this was a concern, said that China will be ready to address the trade deficit, and actually proposed a mechanism, I would say this is visible progress on the trade side. On the people-to-people side, there are a number of new proposals as well. Sandeep, as I explained, on the issue of the boundary question, there was a general sense by both leaders that peace and tranquility has been maintained, that we need to strengthen it. I had already in my pre-summit briefing indicated that both sides are discussing new confidence building measures in the light of new technology, but obviously this is not something discussed at leadership level, and therefore as and when these additional CBMs are agreed to, we will move ahead on that. One point I did forget to mention, both leaders have also agreed that the special representatives will continue to meet. Again, when they meet, the dates on which they meet, where they meet are something that is decided through diplomatic channels.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Few years back, China showed interest to set up a new consulate general in Chennai. So what's the status of it? Was it discussed in this venue?
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Devapriyan from News 18, Tamil Nadu.
Thank you. Maha.
Sir, Maha Siddhiti from CNN News 18. Sir, did India express its concerns over cross-border terrorism from Pakistan, considering there is perceived backing of China for Pakistan, and China being the president of FATF, the question of blacklisting of Pakistan is going to come up. Was that touched upon? Did China say anything about that and not backing Pakistan there?
Just a small note, FS has already shared what was discussed. And I think asking whether this was discussed or not, I think it doesn't make much sense. So if you have any different question, then I think I would appreciate. Yes, please. Sridhar.
Sir, you mentioned that, India sought, both countries sought greater understanding on the issue, on the part of each other, on the issue of trade. But what about the greater understanding of the Indian concerns of Pakistan, terrorism emanating from Pak soil, and also of Indian concerns over the recent Sino-Pak joint position on Kashmir? Have we sought a greater understanding of the Indian position from China?
Maha and Sridhar, both of you have asked the same question. I think both sides are quite clear about each other's positions on such issues. The purpose and objective of the summit is to deepen understanding across a whole range of issues that we have on India-China relations. India-China relations are not predicated on a single issue. They range on everything from the issue relating to historical problems like the boundary to the current cooperation we have in the international and regional sphere. So what I had to say with regard to the issue of terrorism or whether on Pakistan, I have already said. I think it is very evident what our position is on both issues. As far as the Consulate General in Chennai is concerned, as you know, we have an MOU which has been signed earlier to open a to give them permission to open a Consulate General here, and for us to open a Consulate General in one of the Chinese cities. The discussions on the specifics is underway. It will obviously also depend on when both sides want to establish the Consulate General, but there is already an agreement in principle. Therefore, there was no need for the leaders to discuss. The agreement in principle has already been signed.
Thank you.
मनीष झा हूँ TV9 भारतवर्ष से, और जैसा कि आपने अपने ब्रीफिंग में बताया भी कि चीन के राष्ट्रपति ने बताया कि इमरान खान का विजिट हुआ था और उसके बारे में उन्होंने कुछ शेयर किया, तो प्राइम मिनिस्टर का क्या रिएक्शन था, अगर आप इसके बारे में कुछ डिटेल कर सकें।
प्रणय।
सर प्रणय उपाध्याय एबीपी न्यूज से। सर पहला तो वुहान में जिस तरीके से तय हुआ था कि दोनों देश मिलकर किसी तीसरे देश के अंदर प्रोजेक्ट चलाएंगे, तो क्या उस प्रक्रिया को आगे बढ़ाने पे कोई बात हुई है? और दूसरा मामला कि आपने जिस तरह जिक्र किया कि टेररिज्म से लेके एक दूसरे की सेंसिटिविटीज का ध्यान रखने का के बारे में सहमति बनी है, तो क्या आगे ऐसा कोई एश्योरेंस चाइनीज प्रेसिडेंट की तरफ से मिला कि एनएसजी से लेके यूएन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल से लेके और जगहों पे जिस तरीके से असहज स्थिति भारत और चीन के संबंधों में आई है, वैसा वाकया आगे नहीं होगा और चाइना पाकिस्तान इकोनॉमिक कॉरिडोर के इशू पे भी वो भारत के जो हित हैं और भारत की जो चिंताएं हैं उनका ध्यान रखेंगे?
जी इधर इधर।
Jagannathan from INS. Also, issue Huawei discussed at the meeting, and you said that the decisions will be formalized and actions will be taken. How long it will take? Can you give a time frame on the decisions taken on the summit?
थैंक यू मनीष जी और प्रणय, आपने जो सवाल पूछा है मैंने शायद उसका उत्तर ऑलरेडी मैं दे चुका हूं, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान के प्रधानमंत्री ने अभी अभी चीन की यात्रा की है, तो इस बारे में राष्ट्रपति शी ने प्रधानमंत्री को बताया, प्रधानमंत्री ने सुन लिया। जहां तक थर्ड कंट्री प्रोजेक्ट्स है, स्पेसिफिकली इस पे बात नहीं हुई, लेकिन वो जो नया मैकेनिज्म बन रहा है उसका ये मैंडेट ये भी है कि कैसे दो देश के कंपनीज, प्राइवेट सेक्टर, पब्लिक सेक्टर तीसरे देश में काम कर सकते हैं। जैसे मैंने कहा, ये मैकेनिज्म का उद्देश्य है ट्रेड इन गुड्स, सर्विसेज एंड इन्वेस्टमेंट और मैन्युफैक्चरिंग पार्टनरशिप्स भी। तो अभी ये क्या शेप लेगा ये तो दोनों देश, ये दोनों डेलीगेशन मिलने के बाद ही पता चलेगा। As far as your question is concerned, sir, the issue of Huawei or 5G was not discussed between the two leaders. As far as the time frame is concerned, obviously the leaders have now left it to the official level to work out the exact times, dates, agenda and scope of all these meetings, whether it is the trade mechanism, whether it is Raksha Mantri's visit to China, whether it is the SR meeting and so on. But I would hazard the guess that the Prime Minister expects us to do this before the next informal summit. So we are looking at a compressed time frame of certainly less than 1 year. Less than 1 year, because the next summit, yes.
Yes, please.
Sir, I am Prashant from Asianet News. On RCEP, can you elaborate what was discussed between the two leaders? And also there were some reports that opposition leaders were not allowed to meet the Chinese president. Can you clarify?
Yeah, Manas.
Sir, this is Manas from PTI, Press Trust of India. Sir, you said that in fact both sides agreed to enhance cooperation in dealing with the challenge of terrorism in the region. So what are the areas we are looking at to cooperate with each other in tackling terrorism? And second point, the summit was taking place actually under the shadow of Kashmir. Both sides hardened their position just days ahead of his arrival here. So what is the single biggest outcome of the summit here in Mamallapuram?
Manas, I think I have given you 6 or 7 points in my summing up on what the outcomes of the summit were. As far as terrorism is concerned, I have already said what I had to. I have nothing further to add. As far as the RCEP is concerned, again, as I said, the principal point of the Prime Minister is that in any free trade agreement, it is important to have a balanced agreement which involves not only trade in goods, which is bringing duties down, but also in services and in investment. And this was the point the Prime Minister made to the Chinese President. Equally, the President of China accepted that there are concerns and he said he would take them into account. Beyond this, it is for negotiators to go into the details of RCEP. The Prime Minister and the President don't do that. As far as your question regarding whether opposition leaders were allowed to meet the Chinese leader or not, I wish to remind you that this is not a formal summit. In a formal summit, which normally happens in Delhi, which involves a formal welcome ceremony, formal talks and other elements which are mandatory, including the visit to Mahatma Gandhiji's Samadhi. On such occasions, meetings are arranged at the request of the dignitary on other political leaders. This is an informal summit. The objective of the informal summit is to build leadership relations between the Prime Minister and the President. It is not a part of the the elements of an informal summit for there to be interaction with other political leaders. So this is not a departure from practice. It is in an informal summit, the elements are different from the elements of a formal structured summit.
तो विजय लक्ष्मी हूँ मैं इंडिया टीवी से। सर, आप जो ट्रेड के लिए नए मैकेनिज्म की बात करें, क्या कोई टाइमलाइन उसके लिए डिसाइड की गई है कि कब तक वो मैकेनिज्म और क्या रूपरेखा होगी? और दूसरा, क्लाइमेट चेंज पर आपने कहा बातचीत हुई, क्या कुछ कॉन्क्रीट मेजर्स किस तरह के दोनों देश लेंगे, इसको लेकर अगर आप थोड़ा इलैबोरेट कर पाएं, क्या उस पर कोई चर्चा हुई?
जी विजय लक्ष्मी, लास्ट क्वेश्चन। यस प्लीज, आगे आगे आगे।
So obviously, Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President have a very good personal rapport, but going by the recent experiences, when it comes to the Chinese government, it doesn't always translate into action in terms of the stand towards India on many issues, particularly with respect to the Kashmir thing. When that issue wasn't even raised in this meeting, what is the biggest takeaway in your view in that sense?
विजय लक्ष्मी जी, आपने जो कहा ट्रेड की इशू पे टाइमलाइंस अभी तय नहीं हुए हैं, लेकिन जहां तक क्योंकि ये मुद्दा हमारे लिए पेचीदा है, तो हमारी कोशिश रहेगी कि जितनी ही जल्दी ये मैकेनिज्म शुरू हो, हमारे लिए उतना ही अच्छा है। और मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि जिस तरह से चीन के राष्ट्रपति जी ने कहा कि वो हमारी समस्याएं समझते हैं और बातचीत करने के लिए तैयार है, मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि ये मैकेनिज्म जल्द ही तय होगा। लेकिन किस डेट तक होगा और कहां पहला मीटिंग होगा, ये मैं अभी नहीं कह सकता हूं। क्लाइमेट चेंज पे बहुत जनरल डिस्कशन हुआ दोनों लीडर्स के बीच में। दोनों ने कहा कि ये हमारे दोनों देशों के लिए चैलेंज है और दुनिया के लिए भी एक चुनौती है। तो किस तरह से दोनों देश इस पे काम कर सकते हैं, वो बातचीत के अंतर्गत वो उसको हम आगे ले जाएंगे। As far as your question is concerned, sir, the good personal rapport was, I think, fairly evident in the visuals, and this rapport has been established in the 18 meetings that Prime Minister has had, formal, informal, in the sidelines of multilateral meetings, informal bilateral summits, and so on. Now, you mentioned that even if the personal rapport is good, there are issues in the relationship. The fact of the matter is that in all relationships, there are issues, and the closer or bigger the relationship is, the more likely there will be issues. The fact that there are issues does not detract from the positive effect that good interpersonal relations at the leadership level have in building the larger relationship. So I think we have to look at this in perspective. Some of the issues are issues which predate these two leaders. These are historical issues. But we also need to bear in mind that the way this relationship has been managed by our leaderships has ensured that there is no fundamental disruption, that there is a forward-looking trajectory. And to that extent, this informal summit contributed to that process.
So, Raja from Business Line. So this is in the backdrop of this very escalating China-US relationship, trade relationship. How significant is this informal summit when it comes to China-India relationship related? You did mention some of the trade-related issues, but going forward, how do you feel this issues?
Thank you. I'll take one more. Yes, please.
This is Sheikh Maidin from Dinamala Tamil newspaper. Sir, can you say that what is the reason behind selection of Mamallapuram for this second informal summit? And also, what are the plans we have to develop relationship, the century-old relationship between the Tamil Nadu and China also? And third one, do we have a discussions about river and border issues with China and India?
Thank you. Raja, the India-China trade relationship has no direct bearing or connection with what is happening between China and the United States. They are in the midst of a discussion, and I understand there is some news today. I have only seen news reports of the possibility of them reaching some kind of an understanding or an agreement We are, of course, awaiting the details. But as far as we are concerned, there is a very significant market in China. The Chinese a significant market in India. We need to find ways in which we can enhance exports and in which China can increase imports from India, and that is the objective of this mechanism. I appreciate the question regarding Mamallapuram, and I actually want to clarify that I am somewhat surprised at reports in the media that we were looking at alternative sites. Neither is there any public statement on the record, nor are there government sources which claimed any other venue than Chennai. The Prime Minister was very clear right from the outset, and he had given instructions to all of us that this venue of the summit will be in Chennai and in Mamallapuram, because it is a World Heritage Site and because Tamil Nadu has a long-standing historical and trading and cultural ties with China. As far as the initiatives between Tamil Nadu and China are concerned, we will be issuing a press release which will have more details on some of what I have said, including specifically on the proposals the Prime Minister made and President Xi Jinping has accepted in that regard.
River and water.
On the border issue, I have already said the leaders have directed the special representatives on both sides to continue their discussions and have a meeting. On the river water issue, as you know, we have a partial understanding that China will give data in the flood season in respect of certain major rivers. Our effort has been to try and expand the scope of this. We will continue to discuss that with the Chinese side. And this is something where we have an official annual mechanism for discussions on sharing of information relating to cross-border rivers. I just also want to mention, because you spoke of Mamallapuram, that the External Affairs Ministry and the Government of India again greatly appreciate the very solid support we got from the Government of Tamil Nadu for this summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, friends. We are hard pressed for time, but thank you all for joining.
So you earlier saw in a two-window Prime Minister Narendra Modi leaving the Fisherman Cove and Spa Hotel in Chennai. Prime Minister will be departing from Chennai most probably in some time, but we'll tell you more about that. However, some key takeaways from the press briefing addressed by Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale are that India and China will be putting in place a mechanism at an elevated level, which will be chaired by the finance minister from the Indian side and the Chinese premier from the Chinese side, to look at the issue of balancing trade ties between India and China and curb the huge unsustainable trade deficit that currently exists between India and China. And for that, diplomatic contacts would be in place to reach at a particular time when the time frame, etc., would be decided for this elevated level trade discussion mechanism that has been decided between India and China. Besides this new mechanism that has been put in place, it's been decided that our Raksha Mantri would be traveling to China in a bid to build a greater strategic trust between the two countries. Chinese President Xi Jinping took up the issue of facilitation of Kailash Mansarovar pilgrims from India, and it was also decided that 70 events will be held by India and China together to mark 70 years of diplomatic ties between the two countries, 35 each in China and India, and at least one every week, either by India or China. Besides that, it was also decided that tourism should be a special point of focus going forward as India celebrates 75 years of its independence and China celebrates 70 years since the founding of the People's Republic of China. The issue of Kashmir was not discussed. The issue of participation of Huawei in 5G was not discussed, and third country cooperation was not specifically discussed. So the issue of manufacturing partnerships between India and China that could have a third country element, or even trade, investment and services, was discussed. So this was by and large what was discussed. 6 takeaways is what Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale pointed out. They are an appreciation by the two sides that ties are forward-looking in nature, and the Prime Minister described Chennai Connect as a follow-up of Wuhan Summit. Improving trust between militaries is what was the result of the Wuhan Summit and should be a focus going forward, need to cooperate in the fight against radicalization, and the new focus is on people-to-people relations, and our ties need to be predicated on how the people of the two countries benefit. So those are some of the significant takeaways from the press briefing by Foreign Secretary. We continue to be joined now by former Foreign Secretary Shashank with us. Mr. Shashank, your thoughts on the outcome of the Chennai or Mamallapuram summit. Would you say that this has been yet another successful informal summit between the two sides?
Well, first thing, I find that there was very good personal chemistry, personal trust between the two leaders, and both of them appear to be quite confident of the future vision which they have in mind for their own countries and for bringing about better relations between India and China. I think that is something very important. The fact that President Xi has invited our Prime Minister for this same informal summit next year, that shows that both leaders also accept that this process is extremely useful to have an exchange of views on the national visions and the future discussions for the future of this region, future of our countries and the world, because both countries are going to be important players in the economic field. We have both emphasized that it should be a rule-bound international trade relationship, and they have to play an important part in that. They have talked about the terrorism issues and radicalization as large diverse societies, so that they have to work together on climate change, on environmental issues. They have to work very strongly on that. So I think there are many things where they have seen that there would be great value in exchanging views on that. But they have also understood that there is public sentiment which needs to be brought more in favor of improved relations between India and China. So therefore they have asked this time. Last time it was more the question of eyeball to eyeball confrontation between our two armed forces in Dokla Plateau. So this time it was a question of the public perception that does this relationship provide any value to our national interests or not. So therefore they feel that, well, if in case we have better people-to-people relations, this will definitely help in bringing about a better perception, better understanding at the public level of what our leaders and what our governments are trying to do. So therefore this would be, and the starting point would be Tamil Nadu and the Fujian province, where there are links of 1500 years ago, and not just the cultural links but also trade links.
Okay.
So they can be for
now,
future.
Mr. Shashank, before we wind this special broadcast up, your thoughts on some of the very key concrete outcomes that we are seeing now in terms of a new elevated mechanism on the trade front to reduce the issue of trade deficit, appreciation from the Chinese side on the need to have trade balance even within the rubric of RCEP, on say the security and defense point of view, on the people-to-people contacts and tourism issue as well.
Well, briefly I would say that in India there is great amount of disquiet that we have adverse balance of trade of about $58 billion every year for the last 10 years or so, which means that more than our defense budget every year we are handing over money to China. Secondly, on issues of our interest, that is the movement of professionals, service issues, the question of investments. When we are talking of RCEP or the bilateral relations with China, there is sometimes not that much of understanding. There is more understanding for the manufactured goods, which India is interested, but that is part of the package. So therefore, it's a very important decision which has been made, because Prime Minister is interested in not isolating ourselves from the process like RCEP in the Asian region. And the meeting right now which is going on in Thailand, and our trade minister is there. There is feeling in India that would really RCEP make any adverse impact on our Make in India programs, Digital India programs, because then those countries would be able to capture the Indian market, and multinational corporations which are looking for alternative venues for investments, if they move out of China, they would then perhaps go to other countries. That's a very defensive attitude in India. So Prime Minister has tried to say that yes, we want to move ahead, but let there be a balanced relationship, let there be something which we can also take into our public mind, that yes, we are taking interest, their interest also in mind.
Absolutely. Let's conclude the special broadcast by outlining two tweets that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has just tweeted at the end of the second informal summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. PM tweeted, "I thank President Xi Jinping for coming to India for a second informal summit. The Chennai Connect will add great momentum to India-China relations. This will benefit the people of our nations and the world." And the Prime Minister did not forget to thank the people of Tamil Nadu, saying that a special thank you to my sisters and brothers of Tamil Nadu. As always, their warmth and understanding and hospitality was outstanding. It's always a delight to be among the people of this dynamic state. I also thank the government of Tamil Nadu for their efforts in organizing the summit in Mamallapuram. And these tweets have been in English. Several of them have been in Mandarin as well for the benefit of the Chinese citizens. Well, that's it then in the special broadcast. I'll thank you, former Foreign Secretary Shashank, for having joined us on the special broadcast. Thanks for watching.